Chapter 327. Backlash. Lu Chen raised his eyes slightly and looked at the solemn Huoyan. He asked in a slightly astonished tone. Huoyan frowned and said, "What, am I wrong?" Lu Chen pondered for a moment and said, "You're thinking too much. Firstly, the demonization of warriors is a kind of witchcraft. If I don't use it, they won't be able to obtain that kind of power." Huoyan's expression did not relax. He stared at Lu Chen and said, "But if you continue to do this, there will be more and more warriors of the foreign races. Is there no risk? Once they reach a certain time, their numbers are too many, or they suddenly turn on us after demonizing on the battlefield. What will we do at that time?" Lu Chen said indifferently, "This is the second thing I wanted to tell you earlier. That black flame rune just happens to be able to control these divine wood race members. Once someone has any disloyal thoughts just by relying on this thing, I have a way to instantly kill them." Huoyan was startled. His face revealed an astonished expression. He said, "What? The black flame seal pattern has this kind of effect?" Lu Chen looked at him with a smile that was not a smile. He said, "What do you think? If it wasn't like that, why would I spend so much effort to slowly cast the curse one by one? Right, I forgot to tell you. The true name of the black flame seal pattern isn't the black flame seal pattern. It is a variant of witchcraft. Its original name is the black flame curse." He smiled. His smile looked calm and serene, but there seemed to be an indescribable throbbing in his eyes at that moment. "That isn't a seal pattern. It's a kind of curse." The atmosphere in the stone house suddenly became a bit colder. No one spoke for a while. Then after a while Huoyan suddenly stood up. Standing before Lu Chen, his tall stature looked extremely out of place. Furthermore, there was a faint, biting, cold, murderous aura emanating from his body. Lu Chen seemed to have sensed something and he slowly stood up and said, "What's wrong?" Huoyan looked deeply at him, his gaze exceptionally sharp, like two daggers staring at Lu Chen. Then he slowly said, "Did you cast this curse on me and my black fire warriors?" Lu Chen didn't seem to be frightened by the barbarian's murderous aura. He even smiled faintly and said calmly, "I only know of one type of black flame curse. Of course it's the same type." Clang. A crisp sound rang out. It was Huoyan's sudden growl. He reached out his hand and pulled out the dagger that was hanging on his waist. The bright light of the dagger was pointed at Lu Chen. On the other side, the giant wolf Atsu, who was originally a little lazy, suddenly jumped up. With a roar, it bared its sharp fangs at Huoyan and pretended to pounce on him. In the dark stone house, the atmosphere suddenly became tense. The two sides seemed to be confronting each other, and the situation seemed to be on the verge of exploding. Huoyan didn't pay attention to the growling Atsu beside Lu Chen. Instead, he stared at Lu Chen and gripped the dagger in his hand tightly. He said word by word, "Why?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "No reason. I've already told you the black flame curse is just like this. I can use the fire god staff to cast a variant spell to demonize you and increase your strength for a short period of time. But in the end, this kind of curse is still a curse. It naturally has the power to kill." He looked up at Huoyan and said, "It seems like you don't like it?" Huoyan's breathing was slightly hurried, his fangs crossed. He growled and said, "Who would like to have this kind of thing on their body? If that's the case, the lives of me and the other warriors will be in your hands. I can help you get rid of it now." Lu Chen suddenly interrupted him and said calmly. Huoyan was stunned for a moment as if he couldn't react in time. He looked at Lu Chen in shock. Lu Chen said, "You and the other black fire warriors, if you need it, I can help you get rid of this black flame curse. But correspondingly, you will lose the power of demonization on the battlefield." Huoyan's expression changed intensely, but he still didn't say anything. Lu Chen looked at this barbarian man, a strange light flashed in the depths of his eyes. He said, "I think you're just afraid that I can control everyone's life and death. My power is too great and I can even control the tribe? In fact, I still stand by my words. Your barbarian tribe is not worthy of my attention. I don't care about the things that you value so much. If you're afraid, give me the way to return to the north. I will get rid of all your curses now, then give up everything here and leave by myself. From then on, I will have nothing to do with your black fire tribe." Huoyan looked at Lu Chen. Lu Chen didn't look away either, calmly looking at him. After a while, Huoyan's expression changed. Suddenly he turned his head away. The anger on his face quickly dissipated, and he slowly put away the blade in his hand. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Let me think about it first." Lu Chen smiled mockingly, then his expression returned to normal and he nodded. Huoyan turned and walked out. Just as he was about to reach the door, he suddenly squatted down and turned back to Lu Chen. Don't tell anyone about this secret. Lucian nodded and said, I know. Huoyan looked at him deeply, then turned and walked out. The day's tense atmosphere gradually calmed down as Huoyan silently walked out of the black-robed priest's stone house and took away all the Black Fire Tribe warriors. As for Lucian, he didn't seem to be affected by this matter. After Huoyan left, he continued to summon people into the stone house and cast the mysterious black fire seal on them. No one knew what happened between Huoyan and the black-robed priest in the dark stone house, or what they talked about. Iron Bear, Black Bull, and the other Black Fire Tribe warriors were very curious about this. They secretly asked Huoyan a few times, but Huoyan kept a straight face and didn't say anything. With the help of the Black Fire Tribe's powerful divine weapon, the Fire God's Staff, the black-robed priest, Lucian, spent a day's work and finally cast the Black Fire Seal on all 20 people. After this, the abnormally tired Lucian drove them away. He only said that he would send Yi to summon them again in 2 days, and that they would know what he was going to do next. This answer obviously didn't satisfy the 20 Divine Wood warriors, but facing the black-robed priest, no matter how fierce they were, they didn't dare to be impudent. In the end, they could only leave dispiritedly. However, many people secretly warned Yi to act according to the situation and try to find out what this terrifying black-robed priest was thinking. Yes, for this goal they must do everything they can. Although they didn't say it explicitly, the meaning was very clear. Leaf also understood, but she did not seem to have any more emotional fluctuations. At most, she just nodded silently. Finally, after sending everyone off, she slowly walked back to the dark stone house. Ever since Lucian brought Atsu to live here, the stone house had never been lit with any torches or candles. It seemed that this mysterious black-robed priest was very disgusted with things like flames. When this thought flashed through Ye's mind, she couldn't help but be a little surprised. She thought to herself, your tribe is called Black Fire and you worship a fire god. Why would the tribe priest hate flames and light? But for some reason, when she left the familiar crowd outside and returned to this dark place, when the darkness and shadows quietly blocked the light behind her and the eyes of those people, Yi suddenly felt a sense of relief. She actually seemed to be relieved from the bottom of her heart. She was shocked by this feeling and then she quickly felt a sense of guilt. She secretly clenched her teeth and scolded herself. What's wrong with you? A voice suddenly came from the front. It was the black-robed priest's deep voice in the dark corner. He still sounded a little tired, but he seemed to have noticed something. His eyes penetrated the darkness and fell on Yi. There seemed to be some light in his eyes. Yi was startled and quickly bowed her head. I'm fine. That's good. Lucian said lightly and then closed his eyes. It seemed that he didn't want to pursue the matter, or perhaps he had no interest in the feelings of these barbarians. Yi, who was a little nervous, was startled for a moment. After a while, she finally understood that her new master seemed to be too lazy to talk to her. She was a little embarrassed and a little cramped. After turning her head to look around, she wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. It seemed that she wanted to stand up and lean against the corner. Lucian suddenly said, "You sleep here." Yi glanced at him and found that the place Lucian pointed to was the farthest wall from her. She was relieved, but soon she remembered the important task entrusted to her by the villagers before she came here. Those eager eyes, so many people's hope of life and death, all seemed to depend on her alone, even if it might make her sink into the terrible hell to spy on the most terrible person in the world. Yi felt a little cold, but she still gritted her teeth and quietly cried for herself in the deepest part of her heart. Then she squeezed out a smile and slowly approached the black-robed priest. "Your Excellency, do you need me to serve you?" Lucian, who had closed his eyes to rest, frowned slightly and opened his eyes again. He found that Yi, who was approaching him, was trembling slightly, but it seemed that she had summoned up her courage and slowly reached out to untie her clothes. Lucian was silent. After a moment he said, "Don't smile. I think your smile is ugly." Chapter 328. Yi's hand suddenly froze in front of her chest, and then she looked at the black-robed priest with shame and anger. However, Lucian obviously didn't mean to pay attention to her. He just waved his hand and said, "Go sleep over there, don't disturb me." "Yes," Yi answered in a low voice. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt relieved, and the anger she had before disappeared. Even when she looked at Lucian, she felt that this black-robed priest didn't seem to be as terrible and disgusting as she had imagined. However, memories quickly surfaced in her mind. That day in the old tribal camp, many of the clansmen she had known since she was young had died under the hands of this black-robed priest, died in that terrifying black fire. That painful howl was still reminding her, making Yi suddenly feel very ashamed of her weakness just now. She lowered her head and walked back to the corner of the wall that belonged to her, and unexpectedly found that there were 2 or 3 animal skin mattresses there. She was startled for a moment and looked back, only to see that Lu Chen's figure had merged with the darkness, as if he had become a part of the shadow, making it hard to see him clearly. She stared at that side for a moment, and then gritted her teeth, gently moved the animal skin mattresses to the side, and then lay down against the wall. The ground and the wall were very cold, but the animal skin mattresses not far away looked unusually warm. Ye's body trembled slightly, but in the end she still closed her eyes. She had seen and heard too many things that day and also suffered a lot of stimulation and shock. At first she felt very awake and couldn't fall asleep, but after lying down for a while her eyelids started to droop, and she unknowingly fell asleep. Many people saw the scene of Hui Yen rushing in angrily that day. Some were surprised and some were secretly delighted. But in the end Hui Yen went into the stone house alone and stayed for a long time. When he came out again he didn't say a word and left with his men. This also made many people who were originally nervous, or wanted to see a good show, shocked. In the following days, with the changes in the tribe's camp and various situations, the deeds of Lu Qin, the black-robed priest, began to be known by everyone, immediately shocking the entire Black Fire tribe. 3 days after Hui Yen left Lu Chen's place, the chief of the Black Fire tribe, Hua Hu, found him. The father and son had a serious conversation. At the same time, there were also 6 elders who were highly respected in the tribe. They were elders that Hui Yen had to greet whenever he met them. In this conversation, Flaming Tiger straightforwardly expressed his distrust of Lu Qin to his son. At the same time, he sternly warned him that there had never been an outsider who had become a priest of the Black Fire tribe, and Lu Qin's behavior after becoming a priest was incompatible with the behavior of all the great priests in the history of the tribe. This person is not of our race, so he definitely has ulterior motives. He was definitely not an emissary of the fire god. He was a minion of the devil. If we don't get rid of this black-robed priest, then our Black Fire tribe will perish in the hands of this terrifying human. The other 6 elders in the meeting all agreed, either solemnly or tactfully persuading Hui Yen, telling him not to be muddle-headed and to wake up as soon as possible. Everyone said that our Black Fire tribe has lived in this wasteland for thousands of years, following the rules of our ancestors. We have always lived well and there is no need for any changes. That black-robed priest has gone against the rules, committed outrages, and even used the witchcraft of the Black Fire tribe on those captives. Such vile behavior will soon provoke the wrath of the fire god, and he may even send down divine punishment. When that time comes, won't we both be sinners of the tribe? When he reached the end of his speech, Hua Hu stood in front of his son. His aged face seemed to be somewhat distorted from his emotions. He grabbed Hui Yan's arm and said in a hoarse voice, "I'm old, son. The position of tribe leader will be yours sooner or later. As long as you kill that human, I will immediately abdicate and hand over the position of tribe leader to you." From the beginning to the end, Hui Yan, who had been unusually silent, finally stood up. But strangely, his face did not reveal the excited and sudden awakening expression that Hua Hu and the other elders wanted to see. This tall and sturdy barbarian was in the prime of his life. He was a barbarian in his prime. He was majestic and mighty, and had the ambition and meticulousness that ordinary men did not have. He could see further than them and he stood taller than them. Occasionally, when he turned his head back, Hui Yen would realize that he no longer had any companions by his side. There was a bit of pain and disappointment in the depths of his eyes, but his expression was still calm. He stood up in front of the most senior elders of the tribe, and said in front of his father, Fire Tiger, "You don't have to worry about these things in the future." After saying that, he ignored the astonished and angry gazes around him, turned around and walked out, leaving behind a room of angry elders and a suffocating atmosphere. Lu Qin only learned of this matter from Hui Yen the next day at noon. When Hui Yen came to find him, Lu Qin had just finished training the 20 strong Divine Wood warriors and let them go back first. The so-called training, of course, did not mean that Lu Qin would teach these barbarian warriors how to kill people or how to use weapons. Instead, it was to let these people familiarize themselves with the demonized state that he would enter after casting the spell, and how to better kill people. Apart from this, Lu Qin also told all the Divine Wood warriors that when casting the demonized sorcery, he would also plant the world's most vicious curse on everyone's body. If anyone dared to betray him, they would be burned alive in the terrifying black flames. After death, even their souls would not be able to escape, let alone return to the embrace of their ancestors and gods. But as long as all of you listen to my orders and serve me loyally, as long as you achieve great merit, you will be able to remove this curse. At the same time, from this day onwards, all the Divine Wood Warriors would be known as the Black Fire Guards, and would only listen to the orders of the black-robed priest. These words of course quickly spread throughout the entire Black Fire tribe, and at the same time caused a huge uproar. It also became the evidence that the elders of the Black Fire tribe increasingly hated Lucian. When the sun set that evening, when Huoyen sat with him in the stone house, this barbarian already looked somewhat disappointed. Lucian looked at him and said, "What's wrong, are you unable to bear it?" Huoyen waved his hand and closed his eyes as he leaned against the wall. After a while he said, "I didn't expect Father and the other elders to be so short-sighted. They can't see at all why I want to push this matter forward." Lucian sighed, walked to his side and sat down, saying, "You're wrong." Huoyen opened his eyes and looked at him, saying, "What do you mean?" Lucian said, "You can see so much foresight and do so many daring things, that's because you are a unique and different barbarian. Among so many tribes in the wilderness, how many barbarians like you are there? You can't even find one in an ordinary tribe. Perhaps it's normal that they don't understand you?" Huoyen smiled bitterly and said softly, "I just want to restore the glory of my ancestral tribe. I don't deserve such praise." He paused and frowned, saying, "Oh right, can you keep a low profile when dealing with those 20 Black Fire Guards? You know what the situation is now. Demonizing every day is like stabbing their hearts with a knife." Lucian shrugged, saying, "I can't help it, time is too tight." Huoyen was startled, saying, "What do you mean?" Lucian said indifferently, "In 3 days, Thunder Lizard, Ghost Fox and Mountain Spirit, you can choose one of these 3 tribes." Huoyen was shocked and stood up abruptly, saying, "What, how long has it been you're going to fight?" Lucian said calmly and firmly, "The wilderness is so big, there are so many tribes, we don't have time to waste. Even you didn't expect us to start a war so soon, then, those 3 tribes definitely didn't expect it either." Huoyen didn't know what to say for a moment. After a while he said, "Sometimes I feel that in the world, we barbarians are the most warlike, but compared to you, we are worlds apart." Lucian sneered. He turned around and walked into the depths of the darkness. At the same time he said, "Stop pretending. Anyway, it's just blood and lives. In the wilderness, the victor is everything. You're the one who said that to me." Huoyen was silent for a long time, then turned around and walked out of the stone house. As he walked in the open space of the tribe's camp, he occasionally raised his head to look at the dark sky, and suddenly saw a meteor flying across the night sky. That was a bold and unrestrained meteor, emitting a dazzling brilliance, instantly lighting up the entire starry sky, dazzling people's eyes. It flew passionately and fiercely, as if it was rushing forward recklessly, piercing through the darkness, until it finally disappeared into the depths of the distant darkness. Huoyen stared blankly at the meteor's last light disappearing into the night sky, suddenly feeling a chill. When he lowered his head, he found that there was a slight gust of wind in the surroundings. In the darkness of the wilderness, the wind was blowing. Chapter 329. This can't go on any longer. An angry roar came from the house. Although it was suppressed, making the voice sound low, some echoes still floated out from the gap of the closed door. One could feel how angry the person in the house was at this moment. Standing outside the closed door were 4 or 5 barbarian males of the Black Fire tribe. They stood a distance away from each other and surrounded the house behind them. At the same time, they were vigilantly watching their surroundings. But in the dead of the night, no one would notice anything strange. Of course, the barbarian at the entrance had heard the angry roar just now. He turned his head to look, and his eyes were filled with worry. But soon he also turned his head back and cautiously kept his guard up, not allowing any outsiders to come close. At the same time, in the room behind the door, a lit lamp illuminated the people inside. In the middle of the room sat the old chief of the Black Fire tribe, Fire Tiger, with his grandson, Fire Eagle, by his side. Aside from the 2 of them, there were 6 other people in the house. They were the 6 tribal elders who had persuaded Huoyen with Flaming Tiger. The one who had roared like a wild beast was one of the 6 elders. His name was Chishi. He didn't look young and was about the same age as Flaming Tiger. He had a head full of white hair and one of his 2 fangs was missing. However, this old man was a fierce general of the Black Fire tribe when he was young. He had been fighting for his entire life. Although he was old, his fierce and valiant aura was still there. At the same time, his irascible temper hadn't changed. At this moment, Chishi's furious roar reverberated within the room. He paced up and down within the room before abruptly turning around and saying loudly to Flaming Tiger, "Patriarch, did you hear what I said or not?" Flaming Tiger frowned and slightly nodded, indicating that he understood. But his eyebrows were still tightly knitted, as if he had a lot on his mind. Seeing Patriarch Huahu's appearance, the other elders had different expressions. After a while, another elder at the side with a slightly gentler expression pulled Qi and said in a low voice, "All right, Patriarch knows what he's doing. Don't shout randomly. If your voice is too loud and is heard by others, they might run to tell Huoyen or that black-robed priest and there might be big trouble." Qi snorted heavily, his face filled with anger and reluctance. However, it seemed that he was still somewhat fearful of the two people mentioned. Finally he walked to the side and sat down. Only then did this elder, who had persuaded the irascible old barbarian, turn around and look at Huahu. He asked in a low voice, "Patriarch, what are your plans now?" The wrinkles on Fire Tiger's aged face were deep, as if the harsh wasteland had already engraved the sands of time on his body. On this piece of land, the majority of people couldn't live to Huahu's age, so his knowledge and reputation had always been second to none in the Black Fire tribe. Everyone had always trusted him for many years. That was until his son, Huoyen, grew up and displayed his extraordinary talent and strength in front of the tribe's people. To this day, every barbarian of the Black Fire tribe believed that Huoyen would be the next patriarch. His strength, wisdom and courage were unparalleled in the Black Fire tribe. All of this gradually became a public opinion. Sometimes it would make people feel as if everyone was waiting for the day of old Huahu's death. Fire Tiger didn't like this feeling. Since a long time ago when his son Huoyen rose to power, he disliked it. But even if he was the patriarch, he couldn't do anything about it. Therefore he could only remain silent most of the time. Then, with a complicated gaze, he would secretly peep at his son who was growing stronger and stronger day by day. "Patriarch." A somewhat surprised voice sounded in Huahu's ear, startling him. He woke up from his daze, only to discover that he had unknowingly been in a daze for a while. Is this the feeling of growing old? Huahu felt a bit sad for a moment, but he didn't show it on his face. He only muttered to himself for a moment, pretending to be in deep thought. Then he asked, "White Eagle, what do you think?" This elder named White Eagle was also one of the most prestigious elders in the Black Fire tribe. He had assisted Huahu for many years and could be said to be deeply trusted by the old patriarch. But it was also because of this that White Eagle understood Huahu far better than anyone else. Huahu's expression just now had fooled the others, but not White Eagle's eyes. However, White Eagle didn't make any strange expression at this moment. Instead, a trace of worry flashed in the depths of his eyes, and he said to Huahu in a low voice, "Patriarch, what Brother Chi Rhino said just now actually makes sense. If we let Huoyen and that human called Lu Yuan continue to mess around like this, I'm afraid that something big will really happen." Huahu didn't immediately speak, but Fire Eagle, who was beside him, asked, "Grandpa White Eagle, what bad things will happen?" White Eagle glanced at Huahu, and after a moment of hesitation he said, "First of all, they are too warlike. It has only been a few days since they attacked the Divine Wood tribe, but they are already preparing to attack another tribe. Although the warriors of our Black Fire tribe are brave and valiant, there aren't too many of them. As long as it's a war, there will definitely be casualties, and as time goes on, we will definitely not be able to withstand it." The other elders and Fire Eagle nodded, and then White Eagle said, "Also, now that Lu Qin has also taken the captured Divine Wood warriors as people of the Black Fire tribe. He has also placed Black Fire runes on their bodies and named them Black Fire Guards, and they will only listen to him. What does this mean? If he has any ulterior motives in the future, how will our Black Fire tribe deal with him?" And the worst thing is, at this moment Chi Rhino, who had just sat down, suddenly stood up again, walked in front of everyone and said with an agitated expression, "Now we can all see that Lu Qin and Huoyen plan to continue fighting, and then intend to exterminate the tribe, then capture people, and then use Black Fire runes to increase their fighting strength. But everyone, don't forget, according to their methods, it won't be long before our Black Fire tribe's warriors die, but the other tribes will capture more and more Black Fire Guards and obey the priest. At that time, will the Black Fire tribe still be the Black Fire tribe? In the tribe at that time, who would be the one who kept their word? Will it be us Black Fire barbarians, or that black-robed priest called Lu Qin?" The room was silent, and no one opened their mouth to answer Chi Rhino's straightforward question. Only Fire Eagle, who was still young, suddenly flew into a rage. He turned over and jumped up, saying angrily, "We can't let this happen. Damn it, we should have killed that monster with one strike." Killed that black-robed priest with one strike? The few elders in the room, except for the simple-minded Chi Rhino, who was extremely angry and impulsive, looked at each other. After looking at each other a few times, they all frowned and did not speak. Although most of the barbarians were impulsive, violent, and ferocious as long as they were old and still alive, most of them would have seen a lot of things, experienced a lot of hardships, and understood some of the principles of life. On the contrary, barbarians like Chi Rhino, who had always been impulsive and angry until old, were actually rare in their age group. White Eagle was the same. Compared to when he was young, the current him was especially calm. He didn't answer Fire Eagle's words, but looked at the old Chief Fire Tiger and called out softly, "Chief?" Fire Tiger slowly raised his head and glanced at White Eagle. His voice sounded a little low. "What do you want me to do?" White Eagle wanted to say something but stopped. Chi Rhino, who was next to him, became anxious. He simply took a few steps forward and said, "Chief, the current situation of the tribe is critical. We need you to come out and rectify it." Fire Tiger sighed, and there seemed to be some helplessness on his face. He said, "Rectify? Oh. It's not like you don't know the situation of the tribe. Today, almost all the warriors of the younger generation were brought up by Huoyen. They can be said to be dead set on him. Even I, the chief, may not be as useful as Huoyen." White Eagle walked to Fire Tiger's side and sat down. He said softly, "Chief, no matter what, the position of chief is still yours. As long as you speak, the young people of the tribe will have to listen. Even if Huoyen's reputation is soaring, as long as he doesn't say anything, as long as you come out, you can still control the situation." Fire Tiger's complexion slightly changed. He looked at White Eagle and said, "What do you mean?" White Eagle was silent, but at the same time the other elders, including Chi Shi, stood up at the same time and walked behind White Eagle. Fire Tiger's complexion greatly changed. He suddenly stood up and stared at these people. He didn't know why, but his old face twisted. Even his voice became a little hoarse. He hissed, "Are you crazy? He is my son." Chapter 330. Behind Huahu, the young Fire Hawk suddenly stood up, but he seemed a little confused. He didn't seem to understand why his grandfather had suddenly become so agitated, and why the surrounding atmosphere had suddenly become so tense. Fire Hawk instinctively rushed to Huahu's side and grabbed the knife at his waist with one hand. He then looked warily at the tribal elders of his grandfather's generation, and then at his grandfather with some doubts. Opposite him, White Eagle, who was standing in front of the crowd, sighed. He didn't seem to care about Fire Hawk's offending appearance. He even reached out and patted Fire Hawk's shoulder, indicating that he had no malice. Then he looked at Huahu with a complicated expression, saying, "Patriarch, I've been with you for most of my life. At this age, I won't have any other thoughts." Huahu's expression seemed to have calmed down a little. He glanced at White Eagle, then reached out and pulled back his grandson, who was in front of him, and whispered, "It's all right." Fire Hawk let out an "oh," then Huahu looked at the others. After a long silence, he suddenly said, "Huoyen said that Lu Qin is the emissary of the fire god, and that he carries the will of the fire god. What do you think?" Before White Eagle could speak, Scarlet Rhinoceros had already shouted, "This is complete nonsense. Since ancient times, not to mention our Black Fire tribe, even among the thousands of tribes in the southern wilderness, which one of them has ever heard of a human being a priest?" Huahu was speechless. White Eagle and the other elders didn't look good, but no one said anything. Scarlet Rhino's words were indeed very reasonable, and the facts of the past were indeed so. But at this moment, the people present, intentionally or unintentionally, had all avoided another equally irrefutable fact, and that was that Lu Qin possessed the power of black fire that couldn't be clearer. In any case, he wasn't a barbarian, nor a member of the Black Fire tribe. He didn't have the bloodline of the Black Fire, so there must be something wrong with him. Everything was fake. Even if he had the Black Fire, it must be a trick. Huahu's face was wooden. After a moment he whispered, "Then Huoyen," White Eagle immediately said, "that human race priest's methods are crafty. Perhaps he secretly used some method to confuse nephew Huoyen's mind." Before Fire Tiger could say anything, Fire Hawk, who was standing behind him, suddenly became excited. He nodded repeatedly and said, that's right. I also feel that father has been acting a little strange recently. He's been hanging out with that human all day long." "Shut up." Huahu suddenly shouted angrily, interrupting his grandson's words. However, White Eagle, Scarlet Rhino, and the others had already nodded and followed Fire Hawk's words. At the same time they advised Fire Tiger, "Patriarch, even little Fire Hawk thinks so." This is an extremely critical moment. For the future of our Black Fire tribe, you must make a prompt decision. Fire Tiger's complexion was ashen. It seemed as if he had suddenly aged a lot at this moment. He looked at the old people in front of him, then turned his head to look at his grandson, Fire Eagle, who still had a face full of anger. His mouth opened a few times but no words came out. In the end he slowly sat back down. I'm already old. I don't know how many more years I can live. Fire Tiger's voice sounded particularly hoarse and low, as if he was making a final struggle. He said in a low voice, "Originally, I could not be more at ease with Huoyen inheriting the position. But if something happens to me in the future, this is a major matter for the tribe." Everyone looked at each other, not daring to say anything for a moment. Only White Eagle's expression remained the same. He walked to Fire Tiger's side and said, "Patriarch, don't worry. If nephew Huoyen is fine, we naturally won't do anything to him. But if he's been bewitched too deeply by that human shaman and is unable to free himself for the future of our tribe, there's nothing we can do." Hearing this, Firehawk, who was standing to the side, suddenly trembled. It was as if he had only just understood something. Immediately, his entire face turned pale, and he looked completely devoid of blood. Even his body began to tremble slightly. White Eagle glanced at this young boy and saw the shock, panic, and fear on his face. He frowned slightly, and a trace of disdain flashed in the depths of his eyes. Then he looked at Fire Tiger and said in a low voice, "Moreover, don't you still have Firehawk? He's your grandson and your blood runs through his veins. As long as you focus on nurturing him, us old fellows will definitely support him with all our strength. In a few years I think Firehawk will definitely become a qualified patriarch." When he said the last two words, White Eagle turned to Firehawk and deliberately emphasized his words. Firehawk was dumbfounded, but gradually he seemed to understand something. The emotions in his eyes suddenly became blazing, and even the fear and panic he had just felt were replaced by this new surge of excitement. He was so excited that even his breathing became heavy. But after a moment he suddenly sensed something. He turned his head and saw that his grandfather, Fire Tiger, was staring at him. Firehawk's heart turned cold and he subconsciously lowered his head. Fire Tiger stared at his grandson for a long time, and finally let out a long sigh and slowly shook his head. Before Yi became the mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest's maid, she had always been terrified when she arrived in front of the dark stone house. The advice of her clansmen had given her a tragic feeling, and she felt that she would soon die in that stone house. Perhaps she would even be tortured, but if it was for the sake of so many clansmen, perhaps everything would be worth it. But to her surprise, life in this stone house was different from what she had expected from the beginning. The black-robed priest was silent most of the time, but he did not offend her in any way. Well, perhaps he was not interested in her, and even bluntly said that she had an ugly smile. Well, it's better to be talked to like this than to be thrown on the bed and ravaged, Yezi thought with a bit of joy. In these days the priest named Lu Qin ordered her to do things very naturally. All kinds of chores, including going out to call for her clansmen, were handed over to her. This also brought about another effect, and that was the captured divine wood clansmen now generally believed that the black-robed priest had slept with Yi, and that was why they believed her. In the beginning Yi actually wanted to explain, but she quickly gave up on this idea because she found that it seemed that this was the only way for her clansmen to be happy and live more energetically. Although many people began to look at her with strange emotions, which seemed to be hidden very deeply like some sharp things. Stabbing people. It was very strange and even Yi herself could not figure out why. She felt that she had clearly come to Lu Chen's side for the sake of her clansmen. Although Lu Chen really did not do anything to her, in everyone's impression, shouldn't she have done something good for her clansmen? But why was there disdain and contempt in their eyes? Even if everyone was smiling and comforting her in front of her, the stinging in their eyes had never disappeared. Yi. A sudden call awakened Yi from her daze. Yi quivered and jumped up. She hurriedly ran over to the black-robed priest who was sitting in the dark and said, "Sir, do you have any orders?" Lu Chen looked at her indifferently and said, "Go to the camp and ask the Firerock chief to come here." Yi replied with an "oh," and agreed. Nowadays Lu Chen had gotten used to ordering her to do these kinds of errands. She, who walked around the camp all day, seemed to have gained the approval of most of the Black Fire clansmen. She turned and walked out. But when she passed by the door, the giant wolf that was lying there like a guard dog suddenly roared at her and bared its teeth fiercely. Yi was so scared that she screamed and took 2 steps back. Seeing that it had scared Leaves, the black wolf Atu barked twice proudly and lay back down as if nothing had happened. Yezi cursed the abominable big black wolf countless times in her heart, but on the surface she could only avoid it awkwardly and even fearfully. In this dim stone house, it seemed that the black-robed priest was actually a decent person, but the beast was particularly abominable, scaring people all day long. A few nights ago, it even lay beside her in the middle of the night and suddenly roared, almost scaring Yezi out of her wits. She did not sleep well for several days. But after that incident, it seemed that the black-robed priest could not stand it anymore. He grabbed the giant wolf named Atsu and scolded it. He seemed to have kicked the giant wolf a few times. Only then did Atsu become more well-behaved, and Yi was gradually able to sleep peacefully. Unexpectedly, this stupid dog seemed to have a problem again today. While thinking, Yi had already walked out of the house and walked forward quickly. Now she was very familiar with the situation in the Black Fire camp. The other Divine Wood tribesmen were still somewhat restricted and could not walk freely in the Black Fire camp. She was the only exception. It was not the first time that she had gone to pass a message to Huoyin on behalf of Lu Qin, so she knew where Huoyin lived. She was very familiar with the way, but when she was about halfway there, Yi suddenly froze and stopped. A man stopped her on the road. After her identity as the black-robed priest's maid was made public, no one deliberately made things difficult for her or stopped her from walking in the camp. Today was the first time. Yi was a little surprised and a little nervous because she recognized this person. Although this person was not very old, he was very famous in the Black Fire tribe and many people would give in to him. He was Huoying, the grandson of the chief Huohu and the son of the chief Huoyin. He stopped Leaf and looked at Leaf's face with a strange look. Chapter 331. The Fire Falcon was not very old. At most, he could be considered a half-grown boy, so Yezi did not feel anything strange from his body or the way he looked at her. If it were any other adult tribal male, Yezi would usually feel that they were too brave and strong. Based on her past experience, Yezi would usually feel that other people would look at her with a kind of tyrannical and possessive emotion. Whether it was the current victors of the Black Fire tribe or her former homeland, the Divine Wood tribe, it was more or less the same. After all, in the wilderness, men were superior to women for many years. In contrast, it seemed that although the black-robed priest called Lu Qin was a little cold to her, he seemed to be far easier to get along with than the others after living in the same room for a period of time. At least during these days, apart from the occasional harassment from the fat, big, stupid dog, Yezi suddenly found that the fear she should have had seemed to have faded a lot. Instead, her mood gradually became more relaxed. Eat well and sleep well? This feeling shocked Yezi. For a moment, she was in a trance, and an unusually complicated feeling flashed through her heart. Opposite her, the Fire Falcon was also startled. He originally thought that if he suddenly jumped out to stop this maidservant called Yezi, she would probably be surprised or scream. Who knew that there would be no surprise, and instead, he found that she was just standing there in a daze. This woman can't be stupid, right? The Fire Falcon thought to himself. After thinking about it, it was indeed very likely. If there were no flaws, the Divine Wood tribe probably would not have pushed her out. Hey! After thinking about this, the Fire Falcon suddenly felt a little depressed. He could not be bothered to talk nonsense with Yezi anymore and directly asked, "Where are you going?" After being shouted at by him, Yezi immediately woke up with a start. At the same time, a look of surprise appeared on her face. No matter what, the Fire Falcon's identity was not ordinary, and it was very likely that he would be the future chief of the Black Fire tribe. He could not allow a captive like her to be disrespectful. Therefore, Yezi quickly lowered her head and said carefully, "I'm going to find the chief of the Firehawk tribe." Find my father? The Firehawk frowned, then seemed to have thought of something, and his expression became somewhat ugly. He coldly snorted and said, "Did Lu Qin order you to find my father? What does he want?" He was startled for a moment and faintly felt that something was wrong. He secretly glanced at the Firehawk and said, "Young master, Lord Priest ordered me to invite the Firehawk leader to the stone house to discuss some matters. He didn't tell me anything else." Fire Eagle thought for a moment and probably accepted Ye's explanation. After all, she was just an ordinary maid who had been captured. If there was really something important between her father, Huoyin, and the black-robed priest, he would definitely not let her know. The Firehawk immediately nodded and said, "That's perfect. I just came from my father's place so I don't have to make another trip. Go back and tell Lu Qin that my father and my grandfather are discussing an important matter in his residence, and it just so happens that I need to invite the priest over and ask for his opinion. Go back and ask him to come to my father's residence." Yi was stunned for a moment and said, "You want me to go, Go and ask Lu Chen to come over for a discussion. The Fire Hawk glared at her and said angrily, What? Our Black Fire Tribe's chief and chief are both here. Can't we invite him? Whether or not they could invite the black-robed priest was naturally up to the person called Lu Chen to decide. He was just a little maid who had no choice but to live under someone else's roof. Of course, she did not dare to argue with the Fire Hawk. After being shouted at like that, she was immediately startled and hurriedly agreed before turning around and running away. The Fire Hawk looked at the back of the little maid as she ran away with large strides, and the anger on his face slowly dissipated. He then slowly turned around and could vaguely see the stone house where Huoyan lived. As he looked at that place, a trace of haze flashed across his face. Yezi ran all the way back to the black-robed priest's stone house. When she entered the door, Atu, the malicious stupid dog, seemed to want to make fun of her again. Fortunately, Yezi hurriedly shouted to the dark corner inside, Your Excellency, the chief is calling for you. In the depths of the dimly lit stone house, a black shadow shook for a moment. Then Lu Chen's voice came over, Didn't you tell him that I asked you to invite him over? Yi hurriedly told Lu Chen what the Fire Hawk had said to her when she met him on the way here. After Lu Chen heard this, he seemed to be silent for a moment. Then, as if to confirm with her, he repeated saying, Just now what that Firehawk said to you was that the chief and the chief of the Firehawk clan are discussing something, and then asked me to go over? Yes. Yi nodded repeatedly. Lu Chen seemed to respond casually. Then he quieted down and sat in the same place without any movement. He was a little stunned. At the same time, she thought to herself that this black-robed priest seemed to have an extraordinary position of power in the Black Fire tribe. Even when the chief and chief jointly invited him to a gathering, he dared to be so neglectful. Just as her thoughts were running wild, she suddenly felt a gust of wind in front of her. It turned out that a shadow slowly walked out from the depths of the stone house and walked towards the door. Yi breathed a sigh of relief in her heart. It seemed that this person was not too out of line, she thought. But at this moment, the giant black wolf Atsu that had shrunk back to the ground suddenly raised its head and stood up from the ground. It seemed to have sensed something. It stared at the approaching Lu Chen and suddenly growled in a low voice. The growl contained an indescribable fierceness. Yi was startled and could not help but take a few steps to the side. You're crazy again? Yi stared at the abominable big dog and shouted. She deliberately raised her voice so that the black-robed priest could hear her and scold the stupid dog like before. Because every time this happened, Atsu would behave for a while, and Yi could sleep peacefully for at least 2 days. Unexpectedly, after Lu Chen walked over, he did not have the slightest intention of scolding Atsu. Instead, he looked down at Atsu and reached out his hand to gently touch Atsu's head. Atsu bared its fangs and looked ferocious as if it was about to eat someone. Yi clenched her fists nervously. She thought to herself, If you have the guts, bite this priest to death and then eat him, I'll consider you a capable person. You want to go with me? It was Lu Chen who asked Atsu in a low voice. Atsu wagged its tail and stood beside his feet. Lu Chen smiled, nodded and walked out of the door. Yi was at a loss for a moment, unsure if she should follow. But before Lu Chen walked out, he suddenly turned back and said to her, Go call the Black Fire Guards and ask them to go to the Firerock leader's side. Yi was stunned for a moment, then nodded and said, Okay, I'll ask the group outside to go. There were a total of 20 Black Fire Guards trained by Lu Chen. These days they were divided into 4 shifts and took turns to guard outside the house. There were 3 shifts a day and each shift was 4 hours long. At the moment there were 5 people guarding outside the house, so Yi asked this question. Unexpectedly, after a moment of silence, Lu Chen shook his head and said, No, call all of them. Yi's body trembled slightly, and a look of shock appeared on her face. Lu Chen looked at her calmly and did not speak. After a while Yi seemed to wake up from a dream and hurriedly said, Yes, I'll go now. As she spoke, she quickly ran out of the stone house. When the sunlight outside fell on her, she didn't know why, but she didn't feel any warmth. She only felt a faint chill enveloping her body, causing her to subconsciously shiver. Chapter 332. Lu Chen walked slowly through the Black Fire Tribe's camp. Along the way he often saw people from the Black Fire Tribe coming and going. The Black Fire Barbarians also saw Lu Chen, but perhaps out of awe or disgust, no one dared to approach him, let alone take the initiative to greet Lu Chen. Lu Chen was already used to this kind of treatment. In fact, this made him feel more comfortable. If the surrounding barbarians really saw him as a real tribe priest and worshipped him infinitely, he would have a huge headache if they rushed over and kowtowed to him. Along the way, the Black Fire Tribe's camp looked very peaceful. Everywhere he looked, the Black Fire Tribe members were also very normal. But as he walked towards Huiyan's residence, Lucian still quietly took out the Vulcan staff and held it in his hand. It was normal for a priest to have a staff in his hand. Perhaps it was because he walked slowly or Yi ran quickly because she was anxious. But when Lucian was almost at the stone house where Huiyan lived, 20 Black Fire Guards had already rushed over. And behind these barbarian warriors, there was a barbarian girl looking at them from afar. It was Yi. But looking at her, it seemed that she didn't want to come over. Lucian glanced at her but didn't mind. He even smiled at her, then turned his head to look at the Black Fire Guards. Just as Lucian had said before, these 20 barbarian warriors were actually Divine Wood race members who had been captured and surrendered. They had been selected by Lucian, and after casting black flame runes on them, he had ordered people to prepare special clothes for them. Now they could be considered as a small army that only obeyed his orders. Even Lucian directly told these black fire runes that could kill people. In short, they could either work for him or die. This sounded very evil, but Lucian did it without any hindrance. It was unknown if it was because he grew up in such a dark and sinister environment that his heart was as hard as iron, or if he saw that these were all barbarians and had no compassion for them. As for what he was thinking in his heart, only he himself knew. In front of this mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest, the 20 Black Fire Guards were all expressionless. After all, their lives were in someone else's hands and no one would have a good expression. Lucian didn't care about this either. After all, he only wanted the power of these people to die for him. When he whispered some instructions to the Black Fire Guards, and then turned to walk towards the Firerock house, Lucian suddenly thought of the time when he was still in the Kunlun Mountains in the north. At that time, although the days in the Kunlun party were a little boring looking at it now, how could it not be a little warm? Moreover, there was still that young girl who loved to smile most of the time. Even recalling her seemed to warm his heart. He shook his head and collected his thoughts. Then he looked at the door of the stone house and saw the Firehawk standing there. Apart from him, there were 2 other tall Black Fire Tribe warriors standing behind him. Lucian quietly looked at Huiyan. His gaze was calm, but it could not be said to be gentle. However, Huiying seemed to be a bold and courageous youth of the barbarian tribe. Not only was he not afraid of the black-robed priest like the other barbarians, he even sneered and stared at Lucian without any intention of retreating. Lucian walked over and said, "Why are you here?" The Firehawk snorted, but then he seemed to have thought of something and suppressed his temper. He said, "My grandfather and father are waiting for you inside. They have something to discuss with you." "Okay." Lucian replied as if he did not suspect anything. He then walked towards the stone house. However, at this moment Huiying suddenly stretched out his hand and stopped him. He said, "Wait a moment." Lucian's footsteps paused. He asked, "What is it?" Huiying expressionlessly said, "My grandfather just said that only the 3 of you can enter. At the same time, in order to be on guard, no one is allowed to bring weapons inside." "Weapons?" Lucian seemed to understand after thinking for a while. He raised the fire god's staff in his hand slightly and said, "Are you talking about this fire god's staff?" Huiying was just about to speak when he suddenly heard a ferocious roar from the side. It was the giant black wolf beside Lucian. It suddenly walked out from behind him and bared its teeth, staring fiercely at Huiying as if it was about to pounce on him. Huiying's heart turned cold. Previously he had been pounced on by this giant wolf once. To be honest, that time he was quite frightened. At this moment he subconsciously took 2 steps back, but he immediately realized that he was a little embarrassed. He said angrily, "Lucian, aren't you going to take care of this demonic wolf?" Lucian waved his hand, and Atsu's ferocious aura retracted slightly. Huiying heaved a sigh of relief, but his face darkened as he said to Lucian, "Leave the fire god's staff here and go in yourself." Lucian glanced at him indifferently but shook his head. Then, without saying a word, he prepared to walk into the house again. Huiying was immediately enraged. He had been the pride of the tribe since he was young, and everyone knew that he was the candidate for the future patriarch. For the sake of Hua Hu and Huiyan, everyone would give in to him. Even adult warriors would be extremely polite when they spoke to him, and no one had ever looked down on him so openly. Therefore Huiying exploded with the same impulse as before. Of course, it was also possible that he had other thoughts. He suddenly rushed in front of Lucian and blocked his path. He said angrily, "Leave the fire god's staff behind before you can go in." Lucian looked at him and said, "What if I don't want to stay?" Huiying sneered, "Then don't even think about going in." Luchin thought for a moment, then said with an "Oh, all right, then I won't go in." With that he turned around and left. Hui Ying's original sneer instantly froze on his face as if it had frozen. He opened his mouth in shock, but at this moment he didn't know what to do. What are you doing?" he stammered as he shouted at Lu Chen's back. At the same time, his voice was filled with disbelief and indescribable anger as he shouted, "Our tribe's leader and leader are waiting for you. How dare you ignore them?" His voice was so loud that even the people far away could hear him. Everyone looked over. At the same time, from the stone house behind him, an old sigh could be faintly heard. There seemed to be a hint of helplessness in that voice. Until the end, Lu Chen still did not follow Hui Ying's orders. He put down the fire god's staff and entered the stone house to pay his respects to the tribe leader. To this black-robed priest, he didn't seem to care about anything other than the power in his hands that he would never let go. Before he left, he told Hui Ying, who was almost in a state of rage, that if there was anything else, he could ask his grandfather and father to go to the priest's stone house to find him. These words made Hui Ying fly into a rage. The shame of being humiliated in front of him and failing to complete his mission made this barbarian youth bristle with anger. He roared for his men to capture Lu Chen, but very quickly reality taught him another lesson. The 20 black fire guards blocked the way in silence. But under the gloomy gazes of these people, the warriors behind Hui Ying didn't dare to rush over. They even grabbed Hui Ying tightly so that the angry youth wouldn't lose control and rush to his death. This was what happened in the Black Fire Tribe's camp. But it was the Black Fire Guards who had been captured by the Divine Tree who had suppressed the young chief of the Black Fire Tribe. This was, of course, a major event that shook the entire tribe. So very quickly warriors of the Black Fire Tribe rushed over from all directions. The atmosphere in the camp suddenly became tense. Some people began to appear around the priest's stone house intentionally or unintentionally. Some warriors slowly approached and surrounded the stone house. But inside the stone house, everything seemed to be very calm. Yi had also returned. After seeing the confrontation just now, her heart was beating very fast. She had many questions to ask this black-robed priest, but she didn't dare to speak. But after a while, a question suddenly came from the dark shadows. "How many days has it been since you last saw the Fyrock chief?" Chapter 333. Fyrock Chief. Yi was startled for a moment. After thinking carefully for a while, a trace of doubt flashed across his face. I didn't pay much attention." Lu Chen said, "Don't you usually walk around the camp doing things? Could it be that you haven't seen him even once in so many days?" Yi frowned again and said thoughtfully, Now that you mention it, it seems that I really haven't seen the Fyrock chief for a few days." Lu Chen lowered his head in thought. After a moment he said to himself, "Is there really such a coincidence? We're going to battle in 2 days?" Yi didn't hear clearly and asked, "Sir, what did you say?" Lu Chen was silent and no longer spoke. He just sat in the dim shadows of the house, as if he had merged with the surrounding darkness. Fire Falcon, who had been humiliated and belittled by Lu Chen in public during the day, did not rush over to fight Lu Chen as he had said when he flew into a rage. It was unknown whether his anger had subsided or he had been dissuaded. But for Fire Falcon, who had always been proud and arrogant, this should be a great humiliation. Before the sky turned dark, Lu Chen summoned the 20 black fire guards. In the end, as usual, only 5 of them were left on duty, while the other 15 were dismissed to rest. But before they left, Lu Chen called them to the dark stone house and spoke for a while. Outsiders couldn't hear or see what the black-robed priest had said to these people, but when the black fire guards left the stone house, they found that their expressions were slightly solemn. This scene was secretly seen by someone, and it didn't take long for the news to reach the most powerful people in the Black Fire tribe. Fire Falcon was accompanying his grandfather, Fire Tiger, as usual. "He sent all the black fire guards back?" After listening, Fire Falcon was the first to ask, and even his voice rose a few octaves. The one who spoke in front of him was Qi Shi. The one who had been sent to secretly monitor the situation in the black-robed priest's stone house was his subordinate. In the Black Fire tribe, the strongest and bravest barbarian warriors were naturally the group that had gone to the Sacred Wood tribe last time. But these Black Fire warriors mostly trusted Fire Rock, and secondly they already had the Black Fire runes cast by Lu Chen on them. They were warriors with demonic abilities, so it was hard to guarantee which side they would side with. So in this situation, the few senior elders of the Black Fire tribe played a big role. They all had subordinates, and although they couldn't compare to the most valiant warriors, they were still a force not to be underestimated. At this moment, Scarlet Rhino smiled at the Fire Hawk and said, "Indeed. It seems that Lu Qin only came to show off his might during the day. When he went back, he saw that no one dared to provoke him." Fire Falcon fiercely gritted his teeth and said in a low voice, "This person insulted me during the day, I won't rest until he's dead." Chi smiled but didn't say anything. White Eagle walked to Fire Tiger, who was resting with his eyes closed, and said, "Patriarch, it's time to make a decision." Fire Tiger slowly opened his eyes and looked at White Eagle. White Eagle said, "It's best to end this quickly. That Lu Qin is the tribe's priest. Although he can't completely convince everyone, it's not appropriate to kill him in public. It's best to take advantage of the dead of the night to catch this person and his henchmen in one fell swoop. If it's the Sacred Wood tribe's survivors, then our Black Fire tribe will have a bright future. At that time, even if it's daybreak and the other tribesmen find out, with you there to hold the fort, and a few more crimes will be thrown on his head. Naturally, everything will be peaceful." Fire Tiger was silent for a long time. He didn't agree, but he didn't refuse either. When everyone's gazes gathered on him, this old patriarch slowly stood up and walked towards a wall on the other side of the room without saying a word. When he walked to the side of the wall, he reached out and touched an inconspicuous place on the cabinet. There was a rumbling sound and a secret door opened. Then, Fire Tiger walked in alone, and a moment later the secret door closed again. There was silence in the room. Everyone looked at each other. Chi was the most impatient and asked White Eagle, "Patriarch, what's wrong with him? He won't be getting cold feet, right?" White Eagle pondered for a moment, then shook his head and said, "He won't, don't worry." After Fire Tiger walked into the secret room, his eyes swept around. He saw that the room was dim, and there was no furniture, only a sturdy stone chair connected to the ground in the middle of the secret room in front of him. A burly man was tied to the chair. With the dim light, it could be seen that the man was Huoyan. This burly and strong barbarian leader was tightly tied to the stone chair with ropes. Apart from his head, his body couldn't move at all. There were many wounds and bloodstains on his head and face. It was obvious that he had experienced a fierce battle before he was tied to this place. At this moment, perhaps because he heard the footsteps, Huoyan, who had his head lowered, looked up. In the dim secret room, the father and son looked at each other silently. But in their eyes, there seemed to be faint sparks flashing. After an unknown amount of time, Fire Tiger shook his head and slowly walked to Huoyan's side. Then he calmly sat on the ground next to him. A shadow enveloped the father and son, and the sky outside looked like it was about to turn dark. "Father, must you do this?" Huoyan's voice sounded in the secret room. It was low and slightly suppressed, and there was a faint trace of exhaustion in his voice. Fire Tiger's expression was indifferent. After a moment he said, "You forced me to do this." Huoyan sneered but didn't say anything. Fire Tiger waited for a moment, then continued, "I know you hate me in your heart, but have you ever thought about it? I raised you from a young age and nurtured you bit by bit. Everyone in the tribe knows that after I die, the position of tribe leader will be passed on to you. I've already done this much, what else do you want me to do?" Huoyan said, "I don't want you to do anything as long as you watch from the side, father. Everything I do is for the Black Fire tribe. I will make the Black Fire tribe strong again and restore the glory of our ancestors. You will make the Black Fire tribe fall into eternal damnation." Fire Tiger suddenly shouted, interrupting his son's words. Huoyan glanced at him, then sneered and shook his head without saying anything. Fire Tiger took 2 deep breaths and calmed down a little. Then he said, "That man called Lu Qin of the human race is definitely not an emissary of the fire god. He is a demon, a spy sent by the human race. You have been completely deceived by him." Huoyan lightly said, "He has the power of the black fire in his body." Fire Tiger shook his head, "That is just him pretending to be mysterious. The fire god will never pass his power to anyone outside of our Black Fire tribe." Huoyan stared at his father for a long time, then suddenly sighed and turned his head away, no longer saying anything. Fire Tiger didn't seem to care about his son's actions. He only looked at him calmly and said, "Son, I will give you one last chance. As long as you come with us tonight to capture that Lu Qin and then kill that monster with your own hands in front of everyone, then the past will be written off. Everything will be the same as before, you will still be the same, and the position of tribe leader will still be yours." Huoyan's expression twisted for a moment, as if he was struggling in his heart. But very quickly, his expression slowly became firm, and he heavily shook his head. Fire Tiger stood up and stared at his most outstanding son, whom he had high hopes for many years. His eyes were filled with disappointment and he said in a low voice, "Why are you so stubborn? What kind of sorcery did that Lu Qin cast on you to make you become like this?" Huoyan was silent for a moment, then said, "Father, the ones in the wrong are you all, not me." Fire Tiger stared at him for a long time, then finally let out a long sigh, as if he had finally given up. He turned around and slowly walked towards the door of the secret room. Just as he reached out to open the door, his body paused for a moment, but he didn't turn around. Instead, as if he was giving his final instructions, he lightly said, "You will spend your last night here. But don't worry, I will properly train Fire Eagle. In the future he will definitely become an even more outstanding tribe leader than you." As he finished speaking he walked out. The secret door to the secret room closed behind him. Instantly, darkness rushed in from all directions, enveloping Huoyan in a black shadow. Huoyan looked up in the darkness, only to see that the sky outside the crack had finally turned completely dark. The corner of his mouth slowly revealed a cold smile, with a hint of mockery and disappointment. Night had come. Chapter 334. Deep into the night, the Black Fire Tribe's camp was silent. Darkness shrouded the land and the cold wind whistled past. There were also dark clouds in the night sky, and apart from a few torches around the camp, there was almost no other light. To survive in this harsh wasteland, the Black Fire Tribe naturally couldn't be in a relaxed state. Even in the middle of the night, there were people standing guard around the camp. The guards vigilantly watched the seemingly endless wasteland around the camp. Although the sky was too dark to see too far, they still used the torches to illuminate the nearby areas. They were still on guard against dangerous monsters that might appear at night, or unpredictable dangers that came from the depths of the darkness. For example, in the past, the Black Fire Tribe and the Divine Wood Tribe had both been ambushed. Apart from the sentries that were set up around the camp, there would usually be one or two groups of barbarian warriors patrolling the interior of the camp. However, in this dark and windy night, there were no changes to the sentries around the camp. Only the sentries that were supposed to be patrolling the interior of the camp had disappeared. The people who arranged and dispatched these things were naturally the few influential figures of the Black Fire Tribe. However, in the middle of the night, these few influential figures of the tribe didn't go to sleep as usual. Instead, they were gathered in a dark corner of the tribe. About 20 to 30 feet in front of them, there was a remote and somewhat lonely stone house. Occasionally, one or two figures could be seen walking around the stone house. In the darkness, Flaming Tiger, White Eagle, Scarlet Rhino and the others all stood together with solemn expressions. Firehawk also stood beside his grandfather, but perhaps because of his youth, he still couldn't be as calm as these elders. His childish face was filled with excitement and nervousness, and his hands were tightly clenched into fists, even slightly trembling. Behind them, in the dark shadows, there were dozens of silent figures lurking there. The cold glint of their weapons could be faintly seen, and a murderous aura could be felt. "Are you sure there are only 5 Black Fire Guards outside the house?" Chief Flaming Tiger's voice rang out in the darkness as he asked Scarlet Rhino. Scarlet Rhino nodded and said with certainty, "Yes, there are only 5 of them. The other 15 have already returned to the Divine Wood Tribe's residence." Flaming Tiger was silent for a moment. He turned his gaze to the back and glanced at the warriors hidden in the shadows. Then his gaze landed on the White Eagle. White Eagle immediately said, "Don't worry, Patriarch. These warriors are the younger generation of us old men. Although they may not be as good as Iron Bear, Black Ox and the others, they have no problem fighting. The most important thing is that they are obedient." Fire Tiger silently nodded his head. He coldly snorted and said, "If it weren't for the fact that Huoyan brainwashed the young warriors of my clan, causing them to worship that human priest, I would have killed this scourge myself." Hearing this, White Eagle only smiled and said, "Patriarch, there's no need to worry. All the fault lies with that human Lu Qin. As long as he's killed, you can make a public announcement, and those young warriors will naturally come to their senses." Flaming Tiger nodded. It seemed that he agreed with White Eagle's words. He then took a deep breath and said, "Then let's begin." White Eagle turned around and looked at Scarlet Rhino. They then nodded at the same time and suddenly waved their hands towards the darkness. Whoosh! A low but intimidating roar suddenly sounded. Dozens of figures stood up at the same time, their weapons flashing with cold light. Then, under the cover of the darkness, they began to rush towards the lonely stone house. The night wind whistled, seeming to bring with it a bone-chilling cold. When it blew against people's faces, they could not help but shiver. Flaming Tiger seemed to be a little uneasy. He turned to White Eagle and said, I heard that those black fire guards have been enchanted by Luchen. They can enter the demonification state and their combat strength will soar several times. Can we defeat them? White Eagle said seriously, Patriarch, don't worry. I've already thought about this. Although the demonification state is very powerful, it is not a big deal. First, in order to enter the demonification state, the human priest must be the one to cast the spell. But now that it is late at night, that Luchen must be asleep. He might be sleeping with that maid called Yi in his arms right now. At this point, the old men beside him all revealed a somewhat sinister and wretched smile. Flaming Tiger also nodded. Only Fire Eagle was startled. He interrupted White Eagle and asked, Grandpa White Eagle, that is just a woman that the Divine Wood race captured and gave to Luchen. How do you know her name? The White Condor paused for a moment as he stared at the Firehawk's face. A light flashed in his eyes before he shook his head and smiled at the Firehawk. Silly child, I've long hated that human. Since we're going to deal with him, we naturally have to figure out everything, don't you think? Crimson Rhinoceros laughed and said, Yes, that makes sense. But Brother White Eagle, you are very careful. I didn't think of this. Ah. White Condor smiled and ignored them. He said to Fire Tiger, Secondly, the number of black fire guards is still small. We can take advantage of the night to launch a surprise attack and kill fewer people. No matter what, we will still win. As long as we kill that Luchen, the situation will be settled. Fire Tiger nodded. It seemed that he agreed with White Eagle's words. White Eagle glanced at his expression and said, Then let's go and take a look. Everyone looked towards the stone house. They saw that there was a sudden cry of alarm and fighting in the eyes of the Black Shadow. Then, a large number of figures twisted frantically. Cold wind whistled among the sword light and sword shadows, but there was a smell of blood drifting with the wind. Everyone present had walked through mountains of blades and seas of blood in the wilderness. They were very familiar with the smell of blood. White Eagle clapped his hands and said with a smile, It seems that it is going more smoothly than we thought. Patriarch, let's go quickly. Fire Tiger was also relieved. He laughed and said, Okay. With that, the group of people strode towards the stone house. The darkness of the night was like a rolling tide, incessantly boiling. Further away, in the camp of the Black Fire tribe, there were obviously people who were awakened by the commotion here, and there was a commotion in the pitch-black night. Perhaps it was because of the murderous atmosphere, or perhaps it was because someone was obstructing them, but the commotion and cries of alarm were quickly suppressed. At most, there were only a few insensible cries of children that reverberated far away in the dark night with a hint of mournfulness. The crowd was still moving forward. Everyone looked very happy and excited. They were all looking forward to seeing a bloody feast. But halfway through, someone frowned, feeling that something was wrong. That was because the sounds of fighting still hadn't stopped even now. There were still flashes of cold light in the darkness ahead, and at the same time, there were stifled roars. That was the result of telling these young warriors to keep quiet and not make any noise. Closer, closer. Everyone subconsciously quickened their pace. As they neared the dark stone house, Flaming Tiger and the group of elders finally saw the situation in front of the stone house clearly with the help of the faint glimmer of light that shone nearby. Dozens of young barbarians gathered at the entrance of the stone house. However, they couldn't rush in at the moment. This was because there were 4 or 5 figures blocking the entrance of the stone house. They were relying on the narrow space to resist the surging attack. Although they had the advantage of the terrain, to be able to resist the siege of so many people, one could imagine that the battle strength of the people in the sect was not to be underestimated. Using the faint light to take a closer look, everyone immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. They saw that the muscles of the barbarians in the house were bulging, as if they were about to burst. Their bodies seemed to have swelled up and they looked like demons and ghosts. It was the appearance of demons. Without a sound, without any warning, these black fire guards had suddenly entered a state of demons, and then blocked everyone at the door. Fire Tiger's heart suddenly sank, and a wave of unease swept through his heart. He stopped and was about to turn to ask White Eagle, but suddenly, his heart turned cold. It was a coldness that penetrated his heart and lungs. Because, there was a blade that was as cold as ice that pierced through his back, and then mercilessly, with a trace of cruel aura, directly pierced through his old chest. His entire chest and body instantly turned cold. Fire Tiger's body suddenly swayed, and then he turned his head to look. In that instant he felt as if everything around him had suddenly slowed down. Chi Shi and the other elders were still nervously looking in the direction of the stone house. Only his grandson, Fire Eagle, who was standing close to him, seemed to sense something and turned his head to look. At the same time, a trace of fear appeared on his face. Another figure silently appeared behind him, moved his hand away from the hilt of the blade, and then smiled at him slightly apologetically. The night wind whistled past, and the white hair on that person's head became somewhat messy. Behind him, a black shadow was silently stepping out of the darkness. It was such a familiar, abnormally tall figure. It was as if the sky was filled with darkness, and this old barbarian was drowning in it. Chapter 335. Qi Shi. All of a sudden, an incomparably mournful shout that seemed to tear one's throat resounded through the entire area, suppressing all the sounds of weapons clashing. For a moment, everyone was shocked and turned their heads to look. Behind the crowd, the old chief of the Black Fire tribe, Huahu, had his chest pierced by a sharp blade. Blood gushed out like a fountain, and in the blink of an eye, half of his body was already dyed red. White Eagle, who was standing behind him, hugged his body. His face was full of anger, and he pointed a blood-stained finger at Qi Shi, who was standing on the other side of Huahu, who seemed to be at a loss, and roared, "Why did you assassinate the chief?" Qi Shi's face was full of shock, and he subconsciously shook his head, saying, No, I didn't." Before he finished speaking, his eyes suddenly widened, and the elders standing around him also sucked in a breath of cold air. Because at this moment, they saw a shadow walking out from the depths of the darkness behind Huahu and White Eagle, who were already on the verge of death. That tall and burly figure slowly walked over. Someone lit a torch, illuminating his face. It was Huoyan. There were still wounds on his face and bloodstains all over his body. He was a mess, but he carried a dignified murderous aura, like a tide surging out from his figure. And behind Huoyan, more black shadows slowly walked out. They were all expressionless barbarian warriors, and walking at the very front were Tai Xiong, Hanyo, and the others. They were far more mature and powerful than the youths fighting in front of them, and even their gazes seemed colder. Silently, the group of people who had walked out from the darkness had already surrounded everyone here. It was unknown when it started, but suddenly, everything quieted down. There was no longer anyone fighting and no one shouting. Everyone looked around blankly, and then there was the sound of heavy and nervous breathing. "Qi Shi, the chief has always treated you like a brother for so many years. How could you collude with others and kill him so cruelly?" White Eagle was full of grief and indignation, roaring at Qi Shi. At the same time, his tiger eyes were filled with tears, and his emotions were extremely agitated. Qi Shi's face flushed red and he roared, "It wasn't me, don't slander me." As he spoke, he looked around and roared, "You all saw it just now, right? I've been standing here the whole time and didn't do anything. Quickly testify for me." The few tribal elders by the side were also in a state of shock, especially when they saw Huoyan leading a large group of warriors to surround them. They faintly sensed something and quite a few of them turned as pale as paper. Their bodies were also faintly trembling, and for a moment, no one went to answer Qi Shi's question. However, at this moment, a voice suddenly sounded out from beside the White Eagle. It was the Fire Eagle who had been standing beside the Fire Tiger and seemed to be in a daze. The Fire Eagle suddenly said, "No, he didn't kill him. I saw it, it was you." He raised his hand and there was a flame of anger in his eyes. His young face seemed to be slightly distorted from the heat. Just as his finger was about to point at someone, his voice was suddenly cut off. His hand also seemed to have frozen in midair as if it had turned into stone. A dark and tall shadow appeared behind him, silent and austere, as if it had covered up all the warmth of the past. A thick and coarse palm landed on the back of the Firehawk's neck. It was like a lion on the wasteland, using its sharp teeth to bite its child's neck. It was a familiar hand in his memory. He had touched it many times over the years. When he was still a young child, these hands had once hugged him. Perhaps that warmth had long since faded, but at this moment, it seemed to surge into his heart again. However, at this moment, that hand no longer had the warmth it once had. It was as cold as a knife, and all the words in the Fire Eagle's mouth were frozen back into his throat. The Fire Eagle raised his head in confusion, and what he saw was the familiar face of his father, Huoyan, that fierce, cold and scarred face with a trace of disappointment in his eyes. Huoyan quietly looked at his son. Not long ago he had seen with his own eyes the two closest relatives in this world, in this tribe, work together to harm him. He did not do anything to the Fire Eagle and only looked at him. After a while, he said softly, "You think you can be the chief with this appearance?" The Fire Eagle's body began to tremble uncontrollably, and his face turned pale without a trace of blood. At the same time, in a place further away with so many warriors gathered here, the huge commotion could no longer be suppressed. Lights lit up in the Blackfire tribe, and an unknown number of people were gathering here. The commotion came wave after wave. However, at the very center of the crowd, Huoyan was still holding his son's neck, and it seemed that they were very close. He indifferently said to the Fire Eagle, "Say it again loudly. Who killed Grandpa?" The Fire Eagle's body trembled and he looked around. He found that Qi Shi and the other elders as well as the young warriors of the tribe were surrounded by the most powerful warriors of the Blackfire tribe. The murderous intent was so thick that it seemed like it was about to explode. The hand behind his neck seemed to tighten a little. The Fire Eagle's entire body trembled, and he suddenly let out a loud cry, as if he could no longer endure this terrifying pressure. He gasped for breath and cried, pointing at Qi Shi and the others, and shouted, it's them, I saw it with my own eyes, it's them who killed Grandpa." Everyone in the Blackfire tribe was in an uproar. White Condor, who was originally a little nervous, let out a long sigh of relief. He silently took a few steps back and stood behind Huoyan's burly body. He looked as if he wanted to hide himself in the darkness. Huoyan expressionlessly looked at the group of people who were surrounded in the middle. At this moment, they had already become completely terrified and did not know what to do. Then, with the last shred of cold indifference, he waved his hand and slashed towards them. As the hand fell, a strange and distant voice suddenly rang out in the dark sky above the crowd. It sounded as if an ancient god was reciting an incantation from the vault of heaven. The power of darkness descended from the sky and turned into streaks of black light that sank into the bodies of the strongest and strongest barbarian warriors in the crowd. Roar! Waves of roars came from the mouths of many brute race warriors. They stepped forward, their clothes torn, and the muscles of their bodies twisted and bulged. It was as if there was an unimaginable and terrifying power flowing and exploding in their bodies, turning them from ordinary brute race warriors into violent killing machines. Demonization. The people looked up and saw that in the depths of the darkness, there seemed to be a black figure hidden in a place where the naked eye could not see, coldly watching the battle that had just taken place. The darkness was like a tide, crazily surging forward. Screams, shouts, and tragic howls instantly mixed together. In the darkness, blood suddenly splashed, like a rare blood-red acacia flower in the wilderness. There was not much suspense in the outcome of this battle. In fact, this could not even be considered a battle. In front of the powerful brute race warriors who had entered demonization, the young men who had obeyed the tribal elders had almost no ability to resist. What welcomed them was a massacre that cut off their lives. Yes, it was a complete massacre. Apart from White Eagle, the other 5 tribal elders and all the young men who had participated in this matter, who were actually the family members of the 5 elders, were all killed on the spot. That night, blood splattered all over the Blackfire tribe's camp. Some special people who were watching from afar were frightened, and at the same time, they were reminded of the night that their tribe was destroyed not long ago. It was actually so similar. After 1,000 years of dormancy, the Blackfire tribe had suddenly become incomprehensible to everyone. Not only were they cruel and merciless to their enemies, but they were also incomparably bloodthirsty to their own people. That night, the Blackfire tribe underwent a shocking change. The Red Rhino tribe and the other 5 elders of the tribe led a rebellion, plotting to seize the position of the tribe leader, and plotting to kill the tribe leader, Huahu. The tribal warrior leader, Huoyan, was not afraid in the face of danger. He led the warriors loyal to the tribe to resist bravely and turn the tide. Finally, the crisis was reversed and all the traitors were killed. Then, under the agitation of the crowd, many Blackfire tribe warriors captured the remaining members of the 5th elder's family and slaughtered them all. At dawn, Huoyan stopped the crowd and cried in front of his father's corpse. Then, surrounded by the crowd, he officially ascended to the position of tribe leader. Chapter 336. After the hubbub, the entire Blackfire tribe welcomed another dynasty-changing ceremony in great shock. In the tribes of the wilderness, the ceremony of a chief ascending to the throne was one of the most solemn ceremonies. But on this day the new chief, Huoyan, who had just lost his father, Huahu, ordered that the ceremony be carried out in the simplest way. He said that it was not suitable for a grand ceremony. The tribe's camp was still bleeding, and those who had already died on the ground were people that everyone knew the day before. They were clansmen that they could greet when walking on the road. The air was filled with a solemn and austere atmosphere, and no one was in the mood to carry out the ceremony. Moreover, Huoyin did not need this ceremony. This was never what he wanted. That day, when the cremation for his dead father was held, he stood by the fire and stared at the raging flames that engulfed his father's body. From beginning to end he did not say a word. And standing beside Huoyin, the barbarian youth who had inherited the bloodline of Huohu and Huoyin, seemed to be unusually emotional. He cried loudly in front of the fire, his body trembling incessantly. In the end he even knelt on the ground, desperately pounding the ground with his hands. His mouth was sobbing as if he wanted to say something, but he did not say it aloud. The man who stood beside him, as tall as a mountain, seemed to block out all the light, leaving only a dark shadow for him. He was so desperate that he could not breathe, so afraid that he did not dare to speak. When the ceremony ended that day, when Huohu had already turned into ashes and his soul had returned to the arms of the gods, everyone had already dispersed. Only the father and son were left in front of the fire. Huoyin turned his head to look at his son, his face indifferent. Deep in his eyes, a trace of pain flashed, but it was only a flash and no one would see it again. Then he turned and left, not saying another word to his son. When the tall figure had gone far away, Huoyin seemed to finally let out a sigh of relief, his whole body almost going limp on the ground. He stared blankly at the burnt-out fire, then stood up with difficulty, wanting to leave. But at this time 2 figures suddenly walked over from the side. They were strong and fierce. They were Tai Xiong and Hein Yo. The fire hawk was startled and raised his head to look at the 2 of them. Tai Xiong and the black bull looked at each other. There was a trace of embarrassment and pity in their eyes. However, most of the barbarian warriors in the wasteland wouldn't feel too conflicted. Therefore, Tai Xiong quickly said to the fire hawk, "Fire hawk, the chief has asked us to escort you to a place. Protection." The fire falcon smiled bitterly and muttered, "Yes, protection. Let's go," the black yak said in a low voice as he stepped aside. The fire hawk silently walked over. Accompanied by these 2 warriors of the same clan, he walked in the other direction of the tribe. "I still underestimated you." In the dark priest's stone house, there was only Lu Qin and Huoyin sitting on the ground. Other than them there was no one else. The huge, lazy black wolf Atsu was lying at the door drowsily, blocking the prying eyes of all outsiders. The 2 of them didn't sit properly. In fact, they could be said to be sitting on the ground next to the wall without any elegance. They leaned against the wall, then stretched out their legs and crossed their arms, looking at the gradually darkening sky outside the distant window. After a moment of silence, Huoyin said, "How did you underestimate me?" Lu Qin said, "I originally thought you wouldn't be so ruthless." Huoyin smiled, but there was not the slightest hint of joy on his face. His smile looked uglier than crying and more ferocious than a roar. With some self-deprecation, he raised his right hand and waved it in front of his eyes. Then he said in a low voice, "This hand shouldn't be stained with blood yet." Lu Qin glanced at him indifferently and said, "If you want to make yourself feel better, you can think of it this way. Later on, find an opportunity to get rid of the person who did this. Then everything will naturally be at ease." Huoyin put down his hand and stared at Lu Qin. His eyes seemed to be somewhat cold as he said, "Will you believe this kind of thing yourself? Are you lying to yourself like this?" Lu Qin closed his eyes slightly. After a moment he said, "You can. You only need to tell yourself that it's right and then believe in this way of thinking. That's all." His expression and gaze seemed to drift about, as if he was thinking of the past. Then he said, "Sometimes if you don't do this, it will be very difficult for you to survive." Huoyin looked deeply at the black-robed priest. He felt that there were many unknown secrets hidden under the priest's calm expression. However, on this day he was not in the mood to find out. So he only remained silent. After a while, Huoyin suddenly took out something from his bosom, played with it a few times and then threw it to Lu Qin. Lu Qin stretched out his hand to catch it. He found that it was a black stone. Back then, in the Black Stone Canyon where the fire god altar was located, there were many such stones. However, in other places it was very rare. Huoyin looked at him and said, "I'm a little curious. Why do you seem to be able to predict the future? When we left the fire god altar, you made an agreement with me to use the black stone as a signal to hang outside the door. Could it be that you already knew that there would be such an intense conflict between me and father?" Lu Qin used his hand to gently stroke the black stone. He shook his head and said, "I don't know. It's just that when I was at the northern side of the human race, I always heard and saw many such scenes. I thought that it's better to be prepared. It's better that it's useless. However, I didn't expect that you barbarians are the same as us humans. You also like internal strife. Huoyan sighed and didn't say anything. Lucian said, now there's basically no one in the Black Fire tribe that can contend against you. The old fogies, both in the open and in the dark, have all been caught in one fell swoop. What do you plan to do next? Huoyan snorted and said, I've already come this far, what else can I do? You and I just need to continue. He looked up at the sky, a faint trace of excitement and hope appearing in the depths of his eyes. He said in a low voice, this is all for the glory of the Fire God, to restore the supreme glory of our Black Fire tribe ancestors. One day when I succeed, when I see our ancestors' spirits again, I can loudly boast about what I've done. Lucian stared at him. After a while he nodded and said, you're right. In any case, other than thinking like this, other than walking this path to the end, wasn't there no other choice for the time being? Thunder Lizard, Ghost Fox and Mountain Spirit Tribe. You can choose one of the remaining three. Just as Huoyan stood up and prepared to leave, Lucian also stood up and called out to him before asking this question. Huoyan pondered for a while and said, let me go back and think about this carefully. The three tribes have their own advantages and disadvantages. I'll give you an answer tomorrow. Lucian nodded and said, all right. Huoyan asked again, but is there a need to be in such a hurry? Lucian said indifferently, perhaps not at first, but now that such a big event has happened in the Black Fire tribe, a new battle is enough to divert the attention of everyone in the tribe. It can also make them formally and completely acknowledge your position. You need a victory that exterminates the tribe. Lucian said very seriously to Huoyan. Huoyan was silent for a while, then nodded and said, you're right. With that he turned and walked towards the door. However, when he passed by Atsu who was lying on the ground, he suddenly stopped and looked around. He said, this stone house is dim and narrow. It doesn't suit your status. Lucian smiled and said, you know I don't care about this. Huoyan's expression was solemn. He said, as long as we can eliminate the four tribes and unify the north, then go south to the wilderness and revive our Black Fire tribe, I will build you a shrine that has never existed in the wilderness. That is the glory you deserve. Lucian laughed and waved his hand. Then Huoyan also laughed. The two men smiled at each other, then turned and walked in different directions. In the sky outside the house, the darkness of the night once again descended upon this ill-fated tribe. Chapter 337. Before the break of dawn, the sky was as dark as ink. Only the mournful cold wind whistled across the vast and desolate wasteland. Between heaven and earth, there was an austere atmosphere. Under the sky, the Black Fire tribe's camp was shrouded in darkness. Everywhere was quiet. Perhaps the wind was too cold, or perhaps the cold air of the tribe made people feel solemn. At this moment, three figures appeared in the wild grass some distance away from the Black Fire camp. They were Tai Xiong Heinyo and their guard, Firehawk. The cold wind blew across their bodies. Tai Xiong and Heinyo looked as if they were made of iron. They were expressionless. Only when their gazes occasionally swept past Firehawk and looked at this young boy would a strange expression flash across the depths of their eyes. There was regret, pity and also a hint of sorrow. Thinking back to the days of the past, even though there were flashes of blades and shadows of swords, and there were also bloody battles, it gave people a sense of tranquility for some reason. It was as if the days of the past were so peaceful in their memories, so peaceful that they didn't know how many years had passed. It was a kind of time that seemed to have never changed since they were born. Every barbarian of the Black Fire tribe seemed to be walking on the fixed path left behind by their ancestors. They worshipped and respected their ancestors. They never doubted and they walked on with determination. Until the man called Huoyan appeared. He also worshipped their ancestors, but he wanted to break everything and change everything. In the darkness, in the cold wind, a tall and sturdy figure walked out of the darkness. The cold wrapped around him. Even the valiant barbarian warriors like Tai Xiong and Heinyo couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. For a moment, Tai Xiong and the others even felt a trace of unfamiliarity from this leader who had followed them for so many years. Or perhaps it was a trace of confusion towards the dangerous and unpredictable days ahead. Huoyan walked in front of them and stopped. The cold night wind blew past. The farthest horizon seemed to have a faint glimmer of light. But under their feet, the wasteland was still pitch black. Even at such a close distance, they could only see each other's blurry faces. Firehawk looked up at him. For some reason his body suddenly trembled. On the other hand, Huoyan remained silent. His gaze finally landed on his son. His gaze was deep, as if he wanted to see through the child's heart. Under his intense gaze, the fire hawk seemed to find it difficult to resist. It became more and more nervous, breathing faster and faster, and its body began to tremble again. Tai Xiong and Black Bull, who were standing at the side, could not bear to watch. Black Bull wanted to say something but hesitated. Tai Xiong, on the other hand, clenched his teeth and summoned his courage to speak to Hui Yen in a low voice. Patriarch, Fire Eagle is your son after all. Moreover, he is only a child. When your grandfather said to you, Hui Yen suddenly interrupted Tai Xiong's words, but his gaze remained fixed on Huaying. Even his words were directed at Huaying. When your grandfather said to you that he wanted to kill me and make you the next clan leader, what did you do? Tai Xiong and Black Yak trembled at the same time. They pursed their lips and lowered their heads, not daring to say another word. After hearing his father's words, Fire Eagle's face turned ashen. His body trembled uncontrollably and he suddenly cried out, Father, Father, I didn't want to harm you. I really didn't want to harm you. With a plop, Fire Eagle had already knelt in front of Hui Yen. He reached out and hugged Hui Yan's legs, crying, From the beginning to the end, I really didn't say a single word to harm you. Everything was instigated by Scarlet Rhino, White Eagle, and the others. His mournful cries resounded far and wide in this vast wilderness. It sounded like the cries of a young beast that was suddenly facing death, and it caused others to be unable to help but raise their eyebrows and feel pity in their hearts. However, in this silence, other than his cries, there was only the cold wind. There was no other response. This scene caused this brute race youth to seem very lonely. Hui Yen slowly squatted down in front of him, and then stared at his tearful son. His tone was slow and heavy, as if every word he said contained a strange emotion in his heart. You didn't say anything and your grandfather didn't say anything, but after you heard it, you all tacitly agreed, didn't you? When he said this, Hui Yen smiled. However, the expression in his smile seemed to be crying, causing his face to distort like a devil. He said in a hoarse voice, I still remember how excited you were at that time. Were you thinking about the scene of you sitting on the position of clan leader in the future? Hui Yen turned pale with fright and shook his head with all his might. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly felt his throat tighten. His entire body had been grabbed by the throat by Hui Yen with a single hand. After which, he let out a low roar that was like the howl of a demonic beast, and directly lifted Hui Yan's entire body into the air. Pain was revealed on Hui Yan's face. His legs flailed about, and his hands desperately tried to grab the hand on his throat. However, Hui Yan's hand seemed to be made of iron and did not move at all. By the side, Tai Xiong and Black Bull were shocked, and a sliver of unbearable expression appeared on their faces. However, when they saw Hui Yan's demon-like berserk appearance, they could roughly guess the feelings of this chief at that time. How could a person who had been betrayed, abandoned, and assassinated by his closest blood relative in the world remain calm? Hui Yen roared in a low voice and stared at his son, who was grabbed by his giant hand. Within his fury, there was sadness and disappointment as he hissed, why are you so anxious? Don't tell me that I will not pass this position to you in the future. Just what have I done wrong for you and father to treat me like this? Brr. He let out a furious roar like the long roar of a lion, and his voice shook the surroundings. Then he threw Hui Yen away with a single hand. The young man from the brute tribe rolled for a long distance in the underbrush of the wilderness, and finally landed heavily on the ground, moaning in pain. Hui Yen once again took a step forward and walked towards Hui Yen. Black Bull and Tai Xiong looked at each other, and finally seemed to be unable to endure any longer. Black Bull took a step forward and said in a low voice, Chief, he is your son after all, please spare him. You? Hui Yen suddenly opened his mouth and interrupted Black Bull's words. His voice was as deep as the cold wind and he said, Leave me and my son alone. Black Bull and Tai Xiong were silent, and in the end they did not dare to say anything more. They could only look at the figure that was moaning in pain from afar, and leave this place with a trace of a sigh in their hearts. They walked towards the tribe's camp in the distance, and very quickly disappeared into the darkness of the wilderness. Hui Yan's face was as cold as frost, and he did not turn back to look at the two loyal subordinates who had left. His gaze was always fixed on Hui Yen, the son that he had once placed high hopes on, and the son that he loved deeply. After a while he took a deep breath and looked up at the dark sky. The faint light of dawn was slowly rising from the edge of the horizon. Stepping into the last remnants of the darkness, he stepped forward, and walked towards Hui Yen. Light and shadow crisscrossed the earth, and the world of swaying shadows. Dawn was coming. Yi woke up from her sleep and after letting out a low cry, she suddenly sat up from the ground. Then she found that her surroundings were still quiet and dark, and her consciousness returned to her mind. She found that she was still in the familiar stone house, and only then did she press her hand on her chest and gasp for breath. After a long while she finally calmed down. "Did you have a nightmare?" Suddenly, a low and calm voice came from a dark corner of the house. It was Lu Chen's voice. Yi glanced in that direction and after a moment of hesitation she softly said, "Yes." Lu Chen was silent for a moment and suddenly said, "A long time ago when I was still in the north someone said that you barbarians in the south were so fierce, and how you killed without blinking an eye. But no one has ever said that you are actually like the human race, that you have so many emotions and that you also have nightmares?" Yi snorted, a little unhappy in her heart and could not help but retort, "Since I was young, I have heard the elders in my tribe say the same thing about you humans. So there is nothing to say about this matter." Lu Chen seemed to pause and then suddenly laughed. After a moment he said, "What you said makes sense." Yi curled her lips in the darkness. For some reason, Lu Chen seemed to be a little abnormal tonight. He was no longer as cold and taciturn as usual. Perhaps at this moment only Yi, a barbarian girl, was around. Or perhaps he was actually a little emotional, a little lonely, and occasionally in the dead of the night he would also want to find someone to talk to. "What do you think Huyen will do to his son?" Lu Chen asked Yi. Yi was startled for a moment, and for a moment seemed to be shocked by this question. She only reacted after a while. Although she did not quite understand why this mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest would suddenly discuss this topic with her, Yi still tried hard to think and then shook her head. "What can he do? That is his son. Besides, young Master Huaying did not really do anything wrong. At most he will be taught a lesson." "Is that what you think?" Lu Chen's voice sounded a little erratic. "Yes." Yi suddenly felt a little guilty. She glanced at the shadow sitting in the darkness and said, "Is it wrong?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment and then said in a very flat tone, "I also don't know. Since I came to the southern wilderness, he is probably the only barbarian that I have not completely seen through. How far will he go? Actually, I am also a little curious," Lu Chen muttered in a low voice in the darkness. However, the last few words were spoken in such a low voice that only he could hear them. Yi tilted her ears, desperately trying to hear more but to no avail. She suddenly became a little annoyed, but did not dare to get angry at Lu Chen. She could only grit her teeth and bitterly curse in her heart, "These people are not good people." Chapter 338. From that day on, Fire Eagle disappeared from the Black Fire tribe. No one had seen him again and no one knew where he went. It was as if such a person had vanished into thin air, suddenly disappearing from the tribe. After Huyen ascended to the throne of the Black Fire tribe's chief, his usual imposing manner became more and more dignified. Even confidants like Iron Bear and Black Bull were somewhat silent in front of him, and no one in the tribe dared to mention Fire Eagle's name in front of him. That night, many people died in the tribe, and the original power structure was broken, especially the old generation of noble families. Except for the White Eagle tribe, almost all of them were uprooted. After that, Huyen quickly promoted and supported a few other up-and-coming clans. Among them, the ones with the highest status were the clans of Tai Xiong and Hanyo. Furthermore, with his strong support, Tai Xiong and Hanyo also obtained the positions of the leaders of their respective clans. Therefore, for a period of time, the Black Fire tribe, which had undergone great changes, formed a situation where the chief Huyen held sole power, and the White Eagle, Iron Bear, and Black Bull clans under his command kept pace with each other. Then, under the seemingly peaceful situation in the Black Fire tribe, the preparations for another war were carried out in full swing, and the atmosphere in the tribe gradually began to tense up. In the northern border of the southern wilderness, there were 3 other tribes besides the Black Fire tribe. In the end, Huyen chose the Mountain Spirit tribe. Lu Chen had no objection to this choice. After Huyen came to tell him, he just nodded calmly in agreement, and did not even ask why Huyen made such a choice. In the following period of time, preparations for this new war were made, and the first thing to do was to clean up the spies around the Black Fire camp. These spies were all from the Thunder Lizard, Ghostly Fox and Mountain Spirit tribes. In the past there were actually spies like this but not as many as there were now. As for the reason, of course, it was because some time ago the Black Fire tribe suddenly erupted and inexplicably destroyed the Divine Wood tribe, one of the 5 tribes of the northern region. Although the Black Fire tribe had retreated to their own camp after that, and did not display any overbearing aura to the outside world, and it was even said that there was some internal strife. The other three tribes did not dare to let their guard down. The other three tribes had even sent people to the Blackfire tribe to inquire about the reason for the war and why the Blackfire tribe was so ruthless. Towards this question, the Blackfire tribe, or rather Fyrock tribe, had a very simple and powerful answer. It was the Divine Wood tribe who made the first move. In short, no matter what, the Divine Wood tribe no longer existed, and the other three tribes wouldn't stir up trouble for such a vanished tribe. However, it was inevitable that they would be more careful around the Blackfire tribe. Who knew if those lunatics would suddenly go crazy one day and target him? The Blackfire tribe's subsequent purge of their spies caused the other three tribes to become nervous in addition to being surprised. Despite the vastness of the wasteland and despite the nimbleness of the spies, there were no longer any spies left within 10 miles of the Blackfire camp under the Blackfire tribe's relentless pursuit. The other three tribes were all on guard. However, after that, they did not find any signs of the Blackfire tribe launching a large-scale attack. Instead, they received messengers from the Blackfire tribe. The messages they conveyed were similar. For example, they told the Thunder Lizard tribe that their two tribes would form an alliance to rule the northern region together, or they told the Ghost Fox tribe that they would form an alliance to defeat the other two tribes and divide the wasteland. Even the Mountain Spirit tribe, which had suffered great losses in the previous war, had messengers from the Blackfire tribe come over to discuss the specifics. The matter of sending messengers to lobby was actually a little controversial within the Blackfire tribe. This was because the northern region of the wasteland had always revered power above all else, and there had never been such a thing. However, after Lu Qin brought it up to Fyrock, Fyrock accepted it almost immediately and vigorously promoted it without any hesitation. His trusted subordinates, Iron Bear and Black Bull, were puzzled and came to ask Fyrock. Fyrock calmly told them that this was all a trick of the black-robed priest. If they didn't do this, the other three tribes might gang up on the Blackfire tribe like the time when the Mountain Spirit tribe had a priest. In this way, if they gave each of them some benefits, perhaps things would be much easier. Iron Bear and Black Bull were stunned and silent after hearing this. This kind of thing was completely contrary to the martial spirit of the barbarians. It gave off a sinister and wretched feeling. However, under the strong push of Lu Qin and Fyrock, they could do nothing about it. Lu Qin's delaying tactic quickly produced results. The other three tribes, who were originally very nervous, relaxed. It wasn't that they had let down their guard against the Blackfire tribe, and no one was that stupid. The most important thing was that the Blackfire tribe had given them a way to negotiate. They all wanted to see what would happen if they continued to negotiate. If there was a way to negotiate, there seemed to be no need to immediately gang up on them. Moreover, the Blackfire tribe had been so polite and had promised them many benefits. Under such circumstances, this delaying tactic only created a peaceful atmosphere for a few days. One day, the Blackfire tribe brazenly mobilized all of their elite troops, including the bravest warriors of the tribe and the 20 Blackfire guards who had surrendered from the Divine Wood tribe, to attack the Mountain Spirit tribe with all their might. The Mountain Spirit tribe was prepared. They deployed all of their warriors to guard the camp. Their warriors were brave and strong, their fighting spirit soaring. In order to protect the glory of their ancestors and the safety of their tribe, they did not hesitate to fight to the death. This was the inevitable reaction of every barbarian tribe with a long history. They firmly believed that their ancestors would protect them and defeat the evil Blackfire tribe. When the other two tribes heard this news and learned that the Blackfire tribe had given up on the sneak attack, of course, it would have been impossible to sneak attack the Mountain Spirit tribe with such tight security, and instead openly attacked in broad daylight, they could not help but be surprised and secretly delighted. Therefore, everyone was happy to watch the show from the sidelines. It would be best if both sides fought until the last drop of blood flowed out and both sides suffered. Just like that, the war began. The joy lasted until the barbarians of the Mountain Spirit tribe saw their enemy, and the sky was covered in darkness. Shamans? Heart-wrenching and lung-splitting roars of sudden realization resounded through the entire wilderness. Everyone was stunned. This secret had not been leaked during the night of the sneak attack on the Divine Wood tribe. But today it was suddenly revealed in front of the eyes of all the tribes. It was no longer possible for them to unite like they did when they attacked the Mountain Spirit tribe. The dark aura surged and roared. The charging Blackfire warriors began to demonize in the raging black flames, turning into terrifying killing machines. The barbarian warriors of the Mountain Spirit tribe fought bravely, but what greeted them was an even more bloody massacre. With the help of powerful witchcraft, the battle quickly became one-sided. It was so fast that the Thunder Lizard tribe and the Ghost Fox tribe, who had just come to their senses, could not even send reinforcements in time. Once again, the Black Fire tribe won the battle. They surrounded and defeated the Mountain Spirit tribe, capturing all the Mountain Spirit tribe members. The same scene played out again. The terrible and cruel Black Fire tribe once again betrayed the customs and agreements of the barbarians of the wilderness that had existed for thousands of years. They rebelled and committed all kinds of evil. They destroyed other people's ancestors and beliefs, robbed everything they needed, and then left behind ruins. When the Thunder Lizard tribe and the Ghost Fox tribe arrived, they only saw a scene of desolation and chaos. There was a lot of blood and corpses on the ground, but no one was alive. They had all been taken away. And now, in the northern region of the wasteland, there were only 3 tribes left. An ice-cold, invisible darkness was rapidly spreading across this vast land. Chapter 339. Once again, the Black Fire tribe won a great victory. They destroyed the Mountain Spirit tribe, looted almost all the houses of the tribe, and captured most of the women and children as well as many strong men. Then they brought all of them back to the camp of the Black Fire tribe. In this battle, although the Mountain Spirit tribe had made preparations beforehand, the Black Fire tribe won even more easily than the battle with the Divine Wood tribe. This was because they were much stronger than before. The number of Black Fire tribe warriors who could enter the demonized state had increased to 80. Together with the 20 Black Fire guards of the Divine Wood tribe, the demonized army of 100 people swept away the resistance of the Mountain Spirit tribe in an instant. Because the Thunder Lizard tribe and the Ghostly Fox tribe were still lurking nearby, Huoyan and Luqian did not carry out the so-called surrender in the camp of the Mountain Spirit tribe. They brought all the captives back, but they could not escape the same fate. In the camp of the Black Fire tribe, the same thing happened again. And this time, the series of actions of forcing the captives to give up on their ancestral gods, destroying their beliefs, and threatening their families and lives to force them to surrender were not hidden from the eyes and ears of the people of the Black Fire tribe. On that day, when all the people of the Black Fire tribe were still immersed in the joy of this great victory, they were shocked by the even more shrill screams and the shocking and cruel scene. Apart from keeping the onlookers outside of a certain range so as not to affect the terrible coercion ceremony inside, no one stopped them from watching, including the Divine Wood tribe members. After the Black Fire guards participated in this great battle and obtained military merits, the Black Fire tribe had already given up on monitoring the original group of Divine Wood tribe captives, and no longer had any overt restrictions on them. It seemed that they were gradually fulfilling the promise of the black-robed priest to make them part of the Black Fire tribe. In fact, most of the people from the Divine Wood clan were calmer than the people from the Black Fire clan. Perhaps it was because they had experienced this once before. Although they had complicated expressions, they were indifferent when they looked at the painful choices between life and death, their lives and dignity, and the young and old of their families. In contrast, many of the Black Fire tribe members were truly frightened. As the barbarians of the wilderness, no one could imagine that they would be forced to give up the belief of the god in their ancestors. They would not give up even if they had to die. This was the belief of almost all barbarians. But suddenly, when they witnessed that scene with their own eyes, they discovered that this belief was not necessarily as firm as a rock. There was still a black-robed demon in this world that could force barbarians to tear apart their most primitive hearts. Most of the barbarians were hard-hearted and respected force, but they were not fearless. Since ancient times, they had always revered some things such as the god, their ancestors, and ancient traditions. When all of this was suddenly broken in front of their eyes, even if it was not theirs for the time being, many of the barbarians could not accept it. Therefore, the commotion came one after another. Many of the people from the Black Fire tribe had ugly expressions on their faces. Some of them even showed expressions of anger. Their breathing became heavier, their eyes widened in anger, and their fangs crossed. But from the beginning to the end, even though the tragic scene had never stopped, even though the emotions of anger had always been brewing, even though the barbarians usually looked so fierce and unyielding, no one stood up. Everyone in the end just watched in silence. They watched the tragic scene play out again and again. They watched those who were in pain being forced to betray their beliefs and ancestors, or directly die under the terrible black fire and suffer endless torment. But no one stood up, not a single one. Everyone, from the Black Fire tribe to the Divine Wood tribe, looked on coldly, and then gradually, they seemed to have gotten used to it. The story played out coldly and cruelly. Those who chose to die died in pain, while those who chose to live endured humiliation to survive. Then they were swallowed up by a stronger life, and involuntarily integrated into it. What happened to the Divine Wood tribe began to repeat itself to the Mountain Spirit tribe. When night fell, the living and the dead seemed to finally get their first chance to breathe. Most of the people dispersed in silence. Everyone returned to their own residences and hid their hearts under the cover of darkness. No one knew how much hatred and curses were lingering in the sky above the Black Fire tribe's camp that night, but it was likely that many people would not be able to sleep. The black-robed priest's stone house was quiet and dark. Figures walked around from time to time outside the house. They were the Black Fire guards who were in charge of guarding this place. For some reason, these people, who were originally unwilling and seemed to have been forced, actually became more loyal to the black-robed priest after this battle and seeing the fate of the Mountain Spirit tribe. People, even the barbarians, had complicated feelings, didn't they? In the dead of night, the stone house was silent. It was as if everyone in the house had fallen asleep, including the black wolf, Otto. But at some point in time, a burst of muffled sobbing came from the dark corner of the room. She seemed to be very sad and she sounded very afraid and wronged. However, she was also afraid of the even more terrifying shadow in the room, so she tried her best to suppress her emotions. She even covered her mouth with her hands, and only intermittent choking sounds could be heard, like a weak little bird whimpering. Of course it was Yi who was crying. She was unable to free herself from the pain and extreme fear. She curled up in the corner with all her might, but suddenly her voice was cut off. Because at that moment she suddenly saw an incomparably deep black shadow suddenly appear in front of her, and then all the faint light was blocked. A slightly cold hand fell on her face. Yi was scared stiff and did not dare to move. She even forgot to make a sound. Her whole body kept trembling, and she stared blankly at the shadow in front of her. A ray of light flashed as if the shadow's eyes were glimmering in the darkness. Then Yi heard that person's voice. It sounded very calm and gentle. "What's wrong?" Yi did not answer. She only trembled. Lucian waited for a long time. In this quiet night he seemed to be unusually patient. Or maybe he was just too lonely and had nothing to do. In the end, probably unable to bear the strong pressure of the black-robed priest, Yi finally burst into tears again. As she cried, the barbarian girl felt a sense of extreme shame. As a barbarian, even a woman despised weakness. However, she still couldn't control her own pain and timidity. This, in turn, stimulated her sadness even more, so she cried even harder. In that kind of almost self-abandonment, Yi suddenly raised her head and cried to Lucian, "You are not human." Lucian's hand paused for a moment, and then slowly withdrew. After a moment he asked, "Oh, what do you mean?" Yi froze in the midst of sobbing. She was probably surprised that she was not directly burned to death by the terrible black fire of the black-robed priest. But although Lucian looked very calm at the moment, after seeing this person's extremely terrible means during the day and the night of the genocide in the past, Yi began to fear him to death. That night, the fear in her heart seemed to have sprouted once again. It was as if she had thrown caution to the wind. She wiped her tears while trembling and said, Why did you torture us like that? You forced us to betray our ancestors. You destroyed everything we had. You're not human?" In the darkness, Lucian was silent, and then slowly sat on the ground beside Yi. Some distance behind him, the huge stupid dog was still snoring away as if there was nothing bothering it. He did not speak. At this time, after venting out her emotions, Yi began to wake up, and suddenly was scared half to death again. She dared not say anything more, could only huddle her legs and curl up together, at most occasionally glancing at the silent and terrible shadow beside her. After a while, Lucian suddenly laughed in a low voice, with a bit of sarcasm in his laughter. Yi was still very afraid, but at this time she could not help but ask, "What are you laughing at?" Sitting in the darkness, Lucian said lightly, "There are so many barbarians in this camp, everyone claims how brave and strong they are, but in the end, the first and only one who dares to question me is only you, a seemingly weak maid." Yi was stunned for a moment, feeling that something was wrong, but for a moment she did not know what to say. She only heard Lucian said again, "So, every one of these people looks fierce and brave, ambitious and loud, but when it comes to a real crisis they are timid, even weaker than a weak woman." He shook his head, his voice full of strong sarcasm, and said, "Such a race that is strong on the outside but weak on the inside, people who are brave in internal strife, but cowardly on the inside, how can they plot again in the northern land?" "I've truly been worried for nothing," the black-robed priest said indifferently. Then he stood up and walked back. But when he returned to his own corner, he still turned back and said to Yi, "But you are very good." Chapter 340. Dawn came. Yezi, who had not dared to close her eyes for the whole night, finally felt relieved when she saw the ray of sunlight. She lowered her head and ran out of the room with the excuse of fetching water. She did not even dare to look at Luqian. But she did not know what she was afraid of. Perhaps it was the indifferent and contemptuous words of the black-robed priest in the dark last night? Yezi remembered those words in her heart. She understood some of them, but she was confused about some of them. The black-robed priest's thoughts seemed to be very different from the barbarians that Yezi knew. Yezi did not know why, but she was very afraid. Even if the man named Luqian was not vicious to her, and was very friendly to her, at least they got along peacefully. Yezi was not a fool. Although she was not very knowledgeable, she could still feel that Luqian did not have much malice towards her. But she still could not suppress the fear in front of the black-robed priest. That day, when she escaped from the priest's stone house and gasped for breath, Leaf suddenly seemed to realize something when she saw the rapidly growing population of the tribe gradually waking up in the morning light and gradually becoming lively. Everything in front of her may be full of vitality, but behind the lively light, the shadow of the black-robed priest was always a dark existence. It seemed that he was always incompatible with the wilderness and the barbarians on the wilderness, and he never had the intention to blend in. If he had already slaughtered the barbarians, slaughtered the tribe, and swallowed and enslaved many barbarians at this time, then one day when the power of darkness was strong enough that no one could control or resist it, what would this terrible black-robed priest do? Leaf stood blankly in the morning light, trembling all over. When Yezi finally calmed down and wandered outside for a long time, she slowly fetched a bucket of water and went back to the priest's stone house, only to find that it was empty. There was no one in the house. Subconsciously, she put down the bucket in her hand and heaved a sigh of relief. Perhaps she felt more comfortable without the black-robed priest around. But as she stood there, her brows furrowed again. After a moment of silence, Leaf suddenly turned around and ran out. She shouted at a black fire guard who was still guarding outside the stone house. "Where did the priest go?" The black fire guard was taken aback. However, Yezi's current status was somewhat unusual. Even though she was a maid, she was the only maid in the entire Blackfire tribe who could live in the priest's stone house. She was also the only one who could speak to the black-robed priest. No one would want to offend her, not even the black fire guards who were extremely powerful on the battlefield and had killed countless people. So Yi quickly got that person's answer. Chief Fyrock has sent someone over to invite Lord Priest over for a discussion. Leaf was a little confused. She nodded and walked back to the stone house. When her gaze swept across the quiet room, she finally understood a truth that she was unwilling to admit before. That terrifying black-robed priest was already closely linked to her fate. Without him, she would be 100 times more miserable than she was now. She expressionlessly sat down in the corner of the house and buried her head between her knees. She thought she would be sad and sad again, but for some reason this time she did not do anything. She just sat there quietly. After a while, Yezi sighed and stood up. She fetched a rag and some water and began to clean the stone house with unprecedented seriousness. At the center of the Blackfire tribe's camp, there was the tallest and largest stone house. It had always been the residence of the tribe's chief. Not long ago, the previous chief, Flaming Tiger, lived here. Now, Flaming Tiger had turned into ashes in that ball of raging flames and his soul returned to the ancestors. The master of this place had also become Fyrock. When Luqian walked in from outside, the Blackfire warriors who were guarding along the way bowed their heads in respect to the black-robed priest. Even the person who had invited him was one of the two highest-ranking generals in the Blackfire tribe, Black Bull. Even he didn't dare to pass by Luqian and cautiously followed behind him. This kind of treatment made Luqian feel somewhat uncomfortable. However, he understood the reason for all this. It was because of power. Having great power in the southern wilderness might mean having everything, including the respect and awe of others. Huoyen stayed in this large stone house that had several levels and entrances. When he saw Luqian arrive, he immediately came to greet him. He then waved his hand at Black Yak, telling him to go outside and prevent others from entering. Black Bull obeyed and left. Luqian glanced at him and said, "What's wrong? Do you have something to say to me?" Fyrock nodded and said, "There's an urgent matter. Come with me." With that, he turned and walked towards a side passage. Luqian followed behind Black Bull. After a few turns, he saw a secluded small stone room in front of him. At the door stood a man with a vigilant expression. It was Fyrock's other trusted aide, Tai Xiong. Seeing the two approaching, Tai Xiong hurriedly saluted. Fyrock nodded and said, "How is it? Tai Xiong pointed at the small stone room behind him and said in a low voice, "He's still inside." Hui Yan grunted, then looked around and said, "Does anyone else know?" Tai Xiong immediately shook his head and said, "No one knows. I've been guarding here all this time. I can guarantee with my life that no one came near." Good. Hui Yan's eyes flashed with a trace of satisfaction. He patted Tai Xiong's sturdy shoulder and said, "Well done. You stay here and guard. Just like before, don't let anyone come near." Tai Xiong complied and retreated a few steps to the side. Hui Yan gave Lu Qin a meaningful glance. He then opened the door and strode in. Lu Qin arrived at the door. His footsteps paused for a moment before he also walked in. The stone room was not too big and the furnishings were simple. At this moment there was a figure standing there. Hearing the commotion behind him, that person suddenly turned around. When he saw Hui Yan, his face lit up with joy. With some excitement he said, "Tribe leader Hui Yan, you've finally arrived." Hui Yan slightly nodded but was not in a hurry to speak. Instead he glanced at Lu Qin who was standing to the side. Sure enough, Lu Qin furrowed his eyebrows and stared sharply at the barbarian in front of him. After sizing him up, he saw that the other parts of his body were no different from an ordinary barbarian. The only difference was that there was a fur-like thing on his head. It looked somewhat like the fur of a leopard cat. After a while, Lu Qin suddenly snorted and walked over. Looking at the person he said indifferently, "You're from the Ghost Fox tribe? Why have you come here?" That person seemed to have expected such a question and seemed to have some understanding of Lu Qin. With a look of reverence on his face, he said in a deep voice, "Clan leader, Lord Priestess, I have come under the orders of the Ghost Fox clan leader to deliver a great gift to the two of you." Chapter 341. The stone chamber fell into a short silence. The messenger of the Ghost Fox tribe was prepared to be reserved for a moment and take out a shocking gift when the two in front of him opened their mouths. Only in this way could he achieve the effect in goal that the tribe leader had told him before he came. But after he lowered his head and waited for a long time, he found that things seemed to be somewhat different from what he had expected. Whether it was the trusted tribe leader of the Black Fire tribe or the black-robed priest who had recently become a terrifying legend in the northern wilderness, none of them had the intention to speak or respond. The silent atmosphere quickly turned into an inexplicable and heavy pressure, making the Ghost Fox tribe emissary feel depressed and his forehead slightly sweaty. After a while he finally couldn't bear it anymore. He raised his head and secretly glanced at the two in front of him. He saw that the two in front of him seemed to be frowning slightly, but they didn't seem to have the intention to speak. The Ghost Fox emissary really couldn't bear it anymore. He raised his voice and said, "My lords, I am under the orders of our tribe leader to present a generous gift to the Black Fire tribe." Hui Yan glanced at Lu Qin and saw that his face was indifferent, as if he didn't care. Hui Yan also glanced at the Ghost Fox emissary and said lightly, "Oh, what is the generous gift?" Hearing him speak, the originally somewhat cold and oppressive atmosphere in the air suddenly relaxed a lot. The Ghost Fox emissary finally let out a sigh of relief and hurriedly said with a smile, "This generous gift is the friendship of our tribe leader and the entire Ghost Fox tribe. The tribe leader asked me to tell you that from now on, the Ghost Fox tribe is willing to follow the Black Fire tribe and become an ally that will never betray you. In any war or fight, the warriors of the Ghost Fox tribe will stand beside the warriors of the Black Fire tribe. No matter how dangerous the situation is, we will face it together with the Black Fire tribe and kill the enemy together. We will never retreat." Hui Yan raised his eyebrows and a trace of astonishment flashed across his face. Although the Ghost Fox emissary spoke in a dignified manner, the meaning of the Ghost Fox tribe's decision to bow down to the Black Fire tribe could not be more obvious. At most, they probably wanted to preserve their tribe's faith and didn't want to end up like the Divine Wood tribe and the Mountain Spirit tribe. As for the rest, it seemed like the Ghost Fox tribe was completely willing to follow the orders of the Black Fire tribe. At this moment, perhaps the ghostly fox envoy felt that he had not made himself clear enough, so he took another step forward and said, "As long as our two tribes form an alliance, the Thunder Lizard tribe will be the only tribe left in the northern region of the wasteland. When the time comes, we'll attack them together. No matter how capable they are, only death awaits them." This was probably the first tribe in the northern part of the wilderness to surrender so straightforwardly in more than 100 years. Hui Yan was about to speak, but at this moment he suddenly saw Lu Qin also turn his head to look in his direction, and then shook his head slightly. Hui Yan froze, swallowing the words he was about to say. A moment later he saw Lu Chen walking in front of the Ghost Fox emissary. Were you sent by the Ghost Fox clan leader? Facing this mysterious black-robed priest, the Ghost Fox emissary did not dare to slight him. Even from his appearance he seemed to respect this priest more than he did the Black Fire tribe leader Huoyan. He lowered his head and said respectfully, "Yes. This is an important matter that concerns the future of your entire tribe. Have you confirmed it?" The Ghost Fox emissary said resolutely, "What I said just now is absolutely true." Lu Chen snorted and said, "Since it's such an important matter, why didn't your clan leader come himself?" The Ghost Fox emissary was shocked, then looked at Huoyan and laughed dryly. He stammered, "Clan leader, this, there were some words that the Ghost Fox emissary did not say out loud, but in fact everyone in the house understood what he meant. Now that the Black Fire tribe was so powerful, even with a somewhat crazy aura, they had slaughtered the Divine Wood tribe and the Mountain Spirit tribe like a gale sweeping away fallen leaves. If the Ghost Fox tribe leader really dared to come to the Black Fire tribe for a discussion, then no one could guarantee that the Black Fire tribe would not take the opportunity to attack him. But understanding was one thing, but even so, it was obvious that this black-robed priest did not intend to reason with the Ghost Fox emissary. "This won't do," the black-robed priest said to the Ghost Fox emissary very simply. The Ghost Fox emissary was stunned and said, "Sir, what do you mean by this? If you want to give a gift to our clan leader, sure, but your clan leader must come himself." Lu Chen said lightly, "This is a matter that will decide the fate of your entire tribe. Sending a messenger that we don't even know to say a few words is not acceptable. We don't accept it." The Ghost Fox emissary was furious and said, "What if our clan leader comes and there's danger?" Lu Chen ignored his question and said to himself, "If he doesn't come, then we will directly send troops to attack the Ghost Fox tribe." The Ghost Fox emissary was so angry that his face turned green. He said angrily, "Sir, if you continue to be so unreasonable, then our Ghost Fox tribe will be forced to form an alliance with the Thunder Lizard tribe. That won't do you any good, right?" Huoyan smiled and walked to Lu Chen's side. After glancing at him, he faintly said, "The words of our High Priestess are my thoughts. Also I can answer you. If the Ghost Fox tribe leader doesn't come, we will send troops to attack you. If you form an alliance with the Thunder Lizard tribe, we will send troops to attack both of your tribes. In short, there's no difference between exterminating one tribe and exterminating two tribes." When this was said, the Ghost Fox emissary's face changed greatly. It seemed that he did not know what to say for a moment. Lu Chen waved his hand and said, "Bring back Huoyan tribe leader's words and tell your clan leader. Also tell him one more thing. Tell him that I said it. Now that the Black Fire tribe wants to exterminate both of your tribes, it's as easy as lifting a finger. Whether you form an alliance or not has nothing to do with us." After saying this, he turned and walked out. Huoyan looked at the Ghost Fox emissary and said, 3 days later, 5 miles west of the Black Fire camp, tell your clan leader to come and see me." After saying that, he ignored the Ghost Fox envoy who was filled with shock and astonishment, and directly walked out. Walking in the tribe's camp, 2 men walked side by side. Along the way, almost all of the Black Fire tribesmen bowed their heads in respect or made way for them. No one came close or talked to them. Huoyan suddenly sighed. Lu Chen looked at him and said, "What's wrong?" Huoyan's face looked a little bleak. He said, "In the past, when I walked in the camp like this, the tribesmen, big or small, were very close to me. Many people would greet me and joke with me. Some children would even run over to play with me. But now they don't." He took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "They are afraid of me. Of course, maybe they are afraid of you." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "I think they are afraid of both of us." Huoyan was silent and then nodded. "Do you believe what that person said?" Huoyan changed the topic and asked Lu Chen. Lu Chen said, "I think it's most likely true. The Ghost Fox tribe is the most cunning. They probably saw that our Black Fire tribe has been unusually strong recently and they don't want to face us head-on, so they came up with this trick." Huoyan smiled and said, "Do you believe them or not?" Lu Chen sneered and said, "If the Thunder Lizard tribe suddenly has a shaman who is much stronger than us tomorrow, do you think the Ghost Fox tribe will suddenly stab our Black Fire warriors in the back on the battlefield?" Huoyan thought for a moment and said, "This is really hard to say. But as the tribe leader, as long as it is possible, I will not let my warriors fall into this kind of danger." Lu Chen nodded his head and said, "You are right. This Ghost Fox tribe harbors evil intentions. 3 days later we will go and meet their tribe leader. If they are truly sincere in pledging their allegiance, there is no harm in accepting them. But if they are unwilling to surrender, He glanced at Huoyen. Huoyen smiled faintly and said, "Hurry up and engrave the black fire runes on the mountain spirit tribe's black fire guardians. It will be useful." Lucian smiled and said, "Okay." Chapter 342. By the way, how many black fire guards do you plan to recruit from the mountain spirit tribe? Huoyen seemed to have thought of something and asked Lucian. Lucian said, 30. Huoyen raised his eyebrows and asked, "More than the sacred wood tribe?" Lucian nodded and said, "Yes. The number of mountain spirit tribe members who were forced to surrender this time is also a lot more than the godwood tribe members last time. So, there are a lot of talents." Huoyen was silent for a moment and said, "If that's the case, there are 50 black fire guards here." Lucian looked at him calmly and said, What do you want to say?" Huoyen hesitated for a moment before saying, "The number of warriors in our black fire tribe who can transform into a demon with runes is at most 80. This number is getting closer." He looked up at Lucian and said, "And if everything goes well, we still have to deal with the ghostly fox tribe and the thunder lizard tribe. The ghostly fox tribe has fewer people, but the thunder lizard tribe is the most populous of the 5 tribes. At that time, the number of black fire guards will most likely surpass the number of demonized warriors in our tribe." Lu Chen's expression didn't change and he said, "You are right, that should be the result." Huoyen looked at him deeply and said, "Aren't you afraid that when the power changes, those people might have some ulterior motives?" Lu Chen shook his head and said, "They won't." Huoyen said in a low voice, "You are so confident?" Lu Chen said, "First, we can control the life and death of these black fire guards. Second, I think you are the same as me and don't have the leisure to rest in this barren land. When the time comes, we will naturally continue south. The tribes in the south are different from the thunder lizard and ghostly fox tribes. They have many priests and are much stronger. Death is inevitable. At that time, those who deserve to die will naturally die." Huoyen was silent for a long time and then nodded. After separating from Lu Chen, Huoyen walked around the camp once more before returning to his residence. At this time, the emissary of the Ghost Fox tribe had already been secretly sent away by Tai Xiong, Heinyo and the others. When Huoyen walked past the secluded stone house, he turned his head to look in that direction. He seemed to be in deep thought. When he returned to the hall where the Black Fire tribe had lived for generations, he saw a figure standing there, as if waiting for something. Huoyen walked in. That person turned around and saw a white-haired old man. It was White Eagle. Seeing that Huoyen had arrived, the White Eagle hurriedly came over to greet him. Huoyen was very respectful towards him, so he quickly stopped him. After that, the two of them sat down in the stone house. Huoyen then said to the White Eagle, "Uncle Eagle, didn't I tell you before? When there's no one else around, you don't need to be so polite. With our relationship, there's really no need to." The White Eagle smiled and said, No, I know that you have a good temperament and are very respectful to this old man. But after all, you are the tribe leader now, so you still have to show the proper etiquette." Huoyen smiled and didn't say much. He turned his head and changed the topic. "Why did you come to find me today? Is there something wrong?" The White Eagle nodded. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly turned his head and looked outside the house. Huoyen said, "There are people guarding outside. They are all trusted warriors of our tribe. Don't worry, Uncle Eagle." The White Eagle grunted and then said to Huoyen, "I just saw you and the human priest walking in the camp. You seem to have talked for a long time?" Huoyen nodded and said, "Indeed, I just had some things to talk about with the priest." He didn't hide anything and repeated what he had just said to the White Eagle, including Lu Chen's response. It seemed that he had an unusual trust in the White Eagle. After listening, the White Eagle pondered for a while and then slowly said, "I see." Huoyen said, "What do you want to say, Uncle Eagle?" The White Eagle said, "I actually came here to remind you of this matter. But since you have already thought of it, I am much more at ease." As he said this, he smiled and looked somewhat gratified. But then he frowned and said, "But although Lu Chen has responded to this matter, if we think about it in the future, if the number of Black Fire Guards continues to grow like this and surpasses the number of warriors of the Black Fire Guards, there will be some problems in the future." Huoyen was silent. The White Eagle looked at him and said in a low voice, "At the end of the day, Lu Chen is still a human. Although he is temporarily used by us because he wants to return north, it is very difficult to say whether he will be completely on the same side as you in the future. We have to be careful." Huoyen frowned and said, "Uncle Eagle, do you have any ideas?" The White Eagle said in a low voice, At present, the strength of our Black Fire tribe has increased by leaps and bounds. It is indeed because of the power of the Black Fire demonification. In addition, Lucian has also said these things to you. For the time being, we can't say anything more about the number of people. But he narrowed his eyes slightly and moved closer to Huoyan, lowering his voice and whispering a few words. After hearing this, Huoyan's expression suddenly changed. His face first revealed a look of surprise, and then he said thoughtfully, "Our tribe's priest?" White Condor nodded and said solemnly, "That's right, Chief. Only by having our own priests and shamans can the Black Fire tribe be the true foundation for the prosperity of the Black Fire tribe for generations to come." Huoyan fell silent and did not speak for a long time. When Lucian walked back to his own priest's stone house, Yezi and Atsu were both inside. The difference was that Yezi was diligently cleaning the house, while Atsu was lying on the ground and sleeping, looking like a downright lazy dog. Lucian glanced at Atsu and slightly frowned. He suddenly felt that since coming to the southern wilderness, Atsu seemed to have unknowingly changed. But as to what was different from before, he did not seem to be able to tell. Lucian walked over and sat down not far from Atsu. Atsu's ears moved, but its dog eyes did not even lift its eyelids. Lucian did not care about it and just sat quietly. Before long, the dim light and shadow in the house slowly moved, faintly covering his figure in the shadow. Yi glanced at him with a complicated look in her eyes. There was a tinge of awe in them. After so long, even though Lucian had praised her that night, Yi still had a lingering fear of this black-robed priest. She lowered her head and began to work again, wanting to clean the house before it was completely dark. However, after a while she suddenly heard Lucian's voice. He said, "Z, go out for a while. If there's nothing important, don't come in without my summons including you." Yezi was stunned for a moment, then she stood up, respectfully bowed to Lucian and then walked out. When she walked to the door, she could not help but look back at the shadow, only to see the black-robed priest hidden in the shadow, as if he had integrated with the surrounding darkness. After the barbarian girl left, the stone house of the priest suddenly quieted down. Lucian sat for a moment, then raised his arm. There was a flash of light, and the Vulcan staff appeared in his hand. There was no movement in the darkness, and the Vulcan staff slowly floated up from his hand. After a moment, a cold and dark aura filled the air, and the runes on the Vulcan staff began to light up one by one. The only difference was that compared to when Lucian first received this artifact, the speed and brightness of the light on the Vulcan staff had at least more than doubled. He sat in the darkness and his face could not be seen clearly. Only his voice was a little erratic as he said softly, "Many people have died recently. Atsu, I keep feeling that the black fire in this body is slowly growing. Can you feel it?" In the darkness, the black wolf that was originally sleeping suddenly opened its eyes. In the dark green eyes flickered with a faint black flame. Chapter 343. 3 days later, west of the Black Fire tribe's camp. It wasn't an endless, flat and desolate wilderness. There were a few small hills on this piece of land, and withered weeds could be seen everywhere. There were even a few trees that weren't very tall. Huoyan and Lucian had arrived, and with them came a large number of Black Fire tribe's elite warriors. In front of these formidable and valiant barbarians, the atmosphere in the wilderness seemed to have become somewhat somber. Iron Bear and Black Bull, the two most trusted warrior leaders under Huoyan, each led a group of men to sweep through the surrounding area. They plowed through all the places that could possibly hide outsider spies, ensuring the safety of this area. And in the center of the agreed land, the warriors of the Black Fire tribe had all stayed a distance away. Only Lucian and Huoyan stood there, gazing into the distance. "Do you think the people from the Ghost Fox tribe will come?" Huoyan suddenly asked Lucian. Lucian replied, "They should come. We've already spread the word. Without strong support, I don't think the Ghost Fox tribe will be able to withstand this kind of pressure. And since they secretly sent people to join us that day, they're already afraid of battle. All they're asking for is face and conditions that will make their situation better." Huoyan nodded. It seemed that he had no objections to Lucian's words. The sunlight of the wilderness shone down from the sky, shining on the two of them. One was tall, the other short, and their temperaments were different. Huoyan's body was tall and sturdy, and he looked like the most valiant of the barbarians. On the other hand, the black-robed Lucian seemed to be hidden in the darkness. Even though it was daytime, he still gave off a gloomy feeling. Huoyan glanced at him, and after a moment of silence he suddenly said, "There's something I might need your help with." Lu Chen turned his head to look at him and said, Hui Yin said, if possible, please see if there are any talents in our Black Fire tribe, and then choose them as disciples. After grooming them for a while, they might be able to produce 1 or 2 priests in the future. Lu Chen frowned slightly, a strange light flashed in the depths of his eyes. He stared at Hui Yin, but his tone didn't seem to change except that there seemed to be a hint of coldness in his voice. You want me to help your Black Fire tribe train priests? Hui Yin said, yes. Lu Chen was silent for a moment, then said, your Black Fire tribe has never had a priest for so many years, and now you have a promising talent? Hui Yin shook his head and sighed, our Black Fire tribe hasn't had a priest for at least a few hundred years. In the past few years, of course, we have carefully searched the tribe, but we couldn't find anyone with the potential to become a priest. At this point he paused for a moment and his face looked somewhat calm. He continued, but according to what I know, in the past when choosing a priest disciple, it was always the previous generations of priests who chose from within the tribe. Legend has it that only priests can truly sense the witchcraft spiritual power emitted from a tribe member with potential. As for us mortals, no matter how hard we try, it is very difficult to sense. So, I can only ask for your help in this matter. Hui Yin looked at Lu Chen, a trace of sincerity on his face. Lu Chen's expression didn't seem to change, but after a moment he faintly smiled, and a trace of ridicule flashed in the depths of his eyes. He said, you can trust me on such an important matter? Hui Yin didn't say anything. Beside the two of them, the atmosphere seemed to have suddenly turned cold. Just as the atmosphere became slightly tense, a figure suddenly appeared in the distance. After a moment, someone came over to report that the people from the Ghost Fox tribe had arrived. This news temporarily broke the cold atmosphere between Lu Chen and Hui Yin. Hui Yin nodded and ordered people to bring those people over. The group of people that came were the elite warriors of the Ghost Fox tribe. The one leading them was their tribe leader, but there were only 2 people following behind him. Bringing so few guards into the territory of the Black Fire tribe, it was obvious that the Ghost Fox tribe leader understood that even if he brought a lot of people, it wouldn't be of much use. But when the Ghost Fox tribe leader saw the people of the Black Fire tribe, his pupils couldn't help but shrink, and the muscles on his face slightly twisted. This was because there were at least 70 to 80 barbarian warriors of the Black Fire tribe following Hui Yin and Lu Chen. From the looks of it, they were all people who had Black Fire runes inscribed on them. In other words, as long as the Black Fire tribe wanted to, all the warriors present could immediately enter a demonic state. Just the strength of the Black Fire tribe gathered here was more than enough to destroy the Ghost Fox tribe. They could even start a war with the remaining Thunder Lizard tribe and Ghost Fox tribe. It was hard to say who would win. The Ghost Fox tribe leader fiercely cursed in his heart, hating the unfairness of the gods. How did the Black Fire tribe suddenly become so powerful? But the situation was beyond his control. No matter what, he didn't dare to openly say these words. Instead, he laughed along the way and walked in front of Hui Yin and Lu Chen with quick steps. Long time no see, brother Hui Yin. The Ghost Fox tribe leader opened his arms, as if he wanted a firm hug. Hui Yin stretched out a hand to block the Ghost Fox tribe leader's outstretched arm. His expression was indifferent and somewhat distant. It was obvious that he didn't like the words brother at all. However, the Ghost Fox tribe leader didn't show any awkwardness. He laughed, turned around and nodded to Lu Chen with a smile. Lord Priest, since we last met, you've really made people look at you in a new light. The other tribes had also seen Lu Chen's origins on the day of the 5 tribes battle. At that time there were many who wanted to kill him. But no one would have thought that in such a short period of time, this human could actually increase the strength of the Black Fire tribe by so much. If he had known earlier, he would have killed this scourge that day no matter what. The Ghost Fox tribe leader thought bitterly in his heart, but he still smiled at Lu Chen wholeheartedly. Lu Chen had a whole new level of respect for the Ghost Fox tribe leader. After he came to the southern wilderness, he had seen many barbarians. Most of them were straightforward, violent, brave and lacking in calmness. Among them, Hui Yin, who was somewhat scheming, was an exception. However, even Hui Yin couldn't do what this Ghost Fox clan leader did. In comparison, this Ghost Fox clan leader seemed more like a two-faced and scheming human. This made Lu Chen, who had been immersed in this treacherous and dangerous atmosphere since he was young, feel a sense of familiarity and closeness from this Ghost Fox clan leader. Tribe leader, how have you been? Lu Chen said to the Ghost Fox tribe leader with a smile. This smile diluted the cold and dark aura on his body. The Ghost Fox tribe leader smiled and said, "We brothers are just meeting each other. Why make such a big scene and bring so many people? There's no need. Huoyan still kept a straight face and didn't speak. But Lu Qin said to the Ghost Fox tribe leader, "Actually, we just wanted to show you our strength to prove that we didn't lie." As he said this, he pointed to the Black Fire tribe's warriors who were eyeing them like tigers and wolves and said calmly, "We said that we will destroy your Ghost Fox tribe, so we will definitely destroy it." The Ghost Fox tribe leader's face stiffened and his face sank. He sneered and said, "Although you are powerful now, if you go too far, we will join forces with the Thunder Lizard tribe. Even if you can defeat us, your strength will be greatly damaged." Lu Qin shook his head and said, "No, we can easily kill you all." The Ghost Fox tribe leader was speechless for a moment, and his face was livid. Lu Qin walked to his side and said, "Since the tribe leader is here today, you naturally know what to do. As for the Black Fire tribe, we can't really force you too much. So, as long as you do us a favor, your future treatment. Yes, at least you and your family will definitely not have to worry." The Ghost Fox tribe leader was furious and shouted, "Who do you think I am?" Then he paused and said, "If you have something to say it quickly." Lu Qin smiled and lowered his voice to whisper in his ear. The anger on the Ghost Fox tribe leader's face quickly dissipated, and he gradually revealed a surprised expression. At the same time, his expression gradually became serious. In the end, Lu Qin took 2 steps back and said, "That's it." The Ghost Fox tribe leader was silent for a long time and said in a low voice, "This is not easy." Lu Qin turned his head and looked at Huoyan. Huoyan took a step forward, and his burly body suddenly walked in front of the Ghost Fox tribe leader. Huoyan stared into his eyes and said, "Die or fight. You decide." The Ghost Fox tribe leader let out a long sigh, and then slowly nodded. Chapter 344. In the end, the Ghost Fox tribe leader quietly left. The people of the Black Fire tribe began to return to the camp. Huoyan and Lu Qin walked together, but for some reason the two did not speak. The feeling of seamless cooperation in front of the Ghost Fox tribe leader and the others suddenly became unfamiliar. This atmosphere was quickly noticed by the surrounding people. Iron Bear, Black Bull, and the other trusted generals of the Black Fire tribe secretly glanced at them from time to time, but from beginning to end, no one dared to come up and say anything. Only when they saw the shadow of the camp and could even see the outline of the stone houses did Huoyan suddenly say, "Do you have any misgivings or thoughts in your heart?" Lu Qin lightly said, "No." Huoyan snorted and said, "Since that's the case, it's not difficult to help us cultivate 1 or 2 talents. Can't you help me with this?" Lu Qin's expression was calm. It was as if he did not feel the trace of anger that was faintly suppressed in Huoyan's words. Or perhaps he had simply turned a blind eye to it. He said, "Why, do you think that I owe you something?" When Lu Qin said this, he did not deliberately lower his voice, and even had a hint of a sneer. As soon as these words came out, the people closest to them, such as Iron Bear and Black Bull, also heard it. For a moment their faces all changed. Huoyan's face turned ashen. He suddenly stopped, and his huge eyes revealed a hint of fierceness. He stared at Lu Qin and said in a low voice, "What do you mean by this?" Lu Qin did not show any fear. He also stopped and met Huoyan's gaze. He said, "Oh, you don't understand what I mean?" When the two of them suddenly stopped, the surrounding troops immediately fell into a small commotion. First, the guards at the side stopped, and then the warriors further away also reacted and stopped. However, Tai Xiong and Hanyo's expressions turned grave when they heard these words. They immediately commanded their subordinates to surround the 2 leaders who were at loggerheads with swords drawn. Then, everyone retreated at least 100 meters away. No matter what, if a tribe leader and a priest were to quarrel in public, it would really be somewhat shocking. Huoyan also felt that something was wrong. Just as he was about to turn around and give orders, he saw that Iron Bear, Black Bull, and the others had already taken the initiative to withdraw their subordinates far away. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. With a hint of admiration in his eyes, he nodded at the 2. Then his expression turned serious again. He turned his head and stared at Lu Qin for a long time, then slowly said, "So, you still bear a grudge in your heart?" Lu Qin's expression was indifferent. He waved his hand and said, "I don't hold a grudge, but you have to remember that from the beginning, I never wanted to be a priest. It was you who used the secret of returning to the north to force me to do it. I had no choice." At this point he laughed coldly and said, "I will naturally strive to do what I promised you. But if you still want me to be completely loyal to you or the Blackfire tribe, and to do my utmost, that is also the ravings of a lunatic. Huoyan's face first flashed with anger. His fangs bared like a monster that was so angry that it wanted to eat a human. But then he slowly suppressed it. After a while, the anger on his face gradually disappeared, and was replaced by a wave of bitterness and helplessness. He smiled bitterly and walked in front of Lu Qin, standing shoulder to shoulder with him. Looking at the towering buildings of the Blackfire camp in the distance, he suddenly sighed and said, "I don't know if you believe me or not, but from the beginning to the end, I really have no ill intentions towards you. Everything that I have done is not for myself, but more for the sake of the tribe's prosperity." Lu Qin did not speak. Huoyan looked at him and said, "Do you still remember that I told you a few days ago that I would build a shrine for you? That was from the bottom of my heart, there was no falsehood. As long as it can make our Blackfire tribe strong again, and restore the glory of our ancestors, I, Huoyan, am willing to do anything. I can give up anything. Lu Qin, you have the favor of the fire god, you have powerful witchcraft spiritual energy, and your knowledge of power is much greater than mine. As long as you're willing to live in the southern border and agree to stay in our Blackfire tribe, I can promise you anything. You can take whatever you want from our tribe. Even my position as the tribe leader will be yours to decide." Huoyan stared at Lu Qin and took a deep breath. His face was solemn, and with some determination he said, "These are all words from the bottom of my heart, there is no falsehood." Under Huoyan's piercing gaze, Lu Qin was silent for a moment, but he shook his head and said, "I am not interested in your position as the tribe leader, I just want to go home." Saying this, he turned around and walked towards the Blackfire camp. Huoyan stared at Lu Qin's back with a complicated expression, his brows tightly knitted. The surrounding barbarian warriors did not know what was going on between the two of them, and did not dare to rashly approach. But after a while, a white-haired old man suddenly walked out from the crowd. It was White Eagle, and he quickly walked to Huoyan's side. "How is it?" White Eagle asked. Huoyan shook his head slightly, and White Eagle's expression immediately changed. But Huoyan immediately lowered his voice and said a few words to him, most likely repeating Lu Qin's answer. After hearing this, White Eagle's expression slightly relaxed, and he pondered for a moment before saying, "If this is really the case, then this person does not have any other thoughts about the power of our tribe. This is also a good thing." Huoyan sighed and said, "It's a pity that I can't use him." White Eagle comforted him, "Lu Qin is after all a human and not of our tribe. In fact, even if he really wants to join us, there will always be many twists and turns in the process. This is also good. As for the matter of training the next priest, there is no hurry. I don't think he has completely made up his mind. Wait for a period of time, then find an opportunity to talk to him." Huoyan nodded slowly and said, "That is the only way." The main force of the Blackfire tribe returned to the camp in high spirits, majestic and imposing, revealing a vigorous and ferocious aura, as if they wanted to find someone to kill at any time. The fierceness hidden deep within the bodies of these barbarian race warriors had become more and more obvious these days. And among these tall and ferocious barbarians, the black-robed priest, Lu Qin, was obviously a rather unusual existence. When he walked through the crowd, he was clearly out of place with the passionate and energetic barbarian warriors around him. But most of the barbarians were still full of respect for him, and kept a sufficient distance from this wizard. When Lu Qin returned to his own stone house, everything seemed to have quietened down again. The darkness here always seemed to be able to isolate the outside world. Atsu ran out of the house and kept rubbing against Lu Qin's side, looking a little dissatisfied but very affectionate. Lu Qin laughed and reached out to pat its head, saying, all right, I got it. I will definitely bring you next time. This time the main point is not to fight or kill, it is just to scare people." As he said that, he looked around but found that Yezi was not in the stone house at the moment, and he did not know where she went. But Lu Qin did not care too much. In fact, most of the time he did not pay much attention to this barbarian girl, but occasionally when she suddenly disappeared, it was probably because he was used to her figure in the house, and he actually felt a little uncomfortable. Lu Qin shook his head, walked into the depths of the stone house with Atsu and sat down. He quietly looked at the darkness in front of him, his face was calm or perhaps a little lonely. Atsu seemed to feel something and came over, putting its head on his knee. Lu Qin did not look down at it, but reached out to stroke the fur on the head of Atsu. After a moment, his voice floated faintly from the darkness, saying, "I really want to go back, Atsu. But after I said that, I suddenly realized that even if I go back, I will not have a home. Home? His voice gradually became lower. 9 days later, the situation in the northern part of the southern wilderness rose again. Among the 3 remaining tribes, the Thunder Lizard tribe and the Ghost Fox tribe announced an alliance of blood, and reported to the gods of heaven and earth that the Black Fire tribe had committed countless evil deeds. The 2 tribes swore to be brothers of life and death, and would receive the blessings of the gods to slaughter this evil tribe in one fell swoop. In this way the final battle of this land began. Chapter 345. Yezi? What deity did your sacred Wood tribe originally believe in? Lucian asked Yezi. Early in the morning, when the sun had just risen, Yezi heard his question as she was getting up. Even though he was still fearful of the black-robed priest, Lucian did not offend or badmouth Yizichin in their daily interactions. In fact, he was much friendlier than most of the barbarians outside. That was why Yizichin was much more at ease in the dim priest's stone house and in front of the black-robed priest. At the very least, he was not as reserved and resistant to Lucian as he was in the beginning. After suddenly hearing this, Yezi was stunned at first, and then a trace of sadness flashed across her face. She said, "Why do you ask?" Lucian glanced at her and said, "What's wrong? Is it inconvenient to say?" Yezi hesitated for a moment and whispered, "An elder I know told me that in our current situation, we can no longer mention the ancestors of the gods." Lucian paused for a moment, probably only now realizing that in fact, he had exterminated the tribe and destroyed the belief of the ancestors in gods. For a moment he was a little embarrassed, but fortunately he was sitting in the shadow, so he was not afraid of Yezi seeing him. However, after a moment Lucian still said lightly, "It's okay, just tell me." Yezi probably still did not dare to disobey this mysterious and terrifying black-robed priest, so after hesitating for a while, he opened his mouth and said in detail, "When I was young, I heard from the elders in the tribe that we, the Divine Wood tribe, are the descendants of the tree god. Like the branches and leaves of a tree, we live in this wilderness for generations." "The tree god?" Lucian suddenly interrupted her and repeated. Yezi nodded and said, "Yes, the tree god." Lucian was silent for a moment and then asked, "What does the tree god look like?" He thought for a moment, his face full of worship and yearning. His thoughts seemed to have returned to the heyday of the Divine Wood tribe. Well, according to the legend of the tribe, when the world was first born, there was a divine tree that stood between heaven and earth. It was the ancestor of all things, the source of all living beings in the world. The branches, leaves and crown of the tree of God covered the entire vast land of the divine land. Every leaf was alive, and every seed it bore turned into a different barbarian. They were the earliest ancestors of all the tribes, and they have been living and multiplying until today. Lucian listened quietly and did not speak for a while. He glanced over and felt a little uneasy. He also felt a little regretful. He did not know if his words had angered the priest. After all, the Divine Wood tribe no longer existed. But after the timidity, Yezi was a little angry. She thought to herself, "Aren't you the one who started this? Sir, are you all right?" He was still a little afraid of the black-robed priest and asked in a low voice. Lucian looked up and shook his head. "It's nothing. It's just that those words just now suddenly sounded a little familiar." "Familiar?" Yi was stunned for a moment and then asked in astonishment, "Where did you hear the legend of our tribe before?" Lucian smiled and did not answer her question. Instead, he stood up and asked casually, "In addition to your original Divine Wood tribe, are there any other tribes in the wilderness that believe in the tree god?" Yi thought for a moment and then shook her head. "I don't think so." Lucian nodded and said, "The Black Fire tribe believes in the god of fire, the Mountain Spirit tribe believes in the god of earth, and the Thunder Lizard tribe and the Ghost Fox tribe believe that they are the descendants of the divine beast. Each tribe believes in a different god, but most of the tribes say that the god they believe in created all things and all living beings in the world." He slowly walked up to Yi, looked down at her and asked calmly, "Why do you think this is so?" Yi had probably never been asked this question before. For a moment she was a little tongue-tied. After a while she said, "I don't know." Lucian said, "Then which one do you believe in?" Yi said without hesitation, "Of course I believe in the tree god of my tribe." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly remembered the current situation. The Divine Wood tribe had been destroyed, and the god that she once believed in had long been abandoned. For a moment Yi was at a loss. Lucian stared at her and slowly squatted down in front of her. Yi was a little scared by the black-robed priest's gaze. She subconsciously shrank back and murmured, What are you doing? It seems that you still remember the original tribe in your heart. He confirmed as if nothing had happened. Ye's heart suddenly sank and her whole face turned pale. She lowered her head, trying to suppress the fear in her heart and beg for mercy from this terrible black-robed priest. At the same time, she even thought of the day when the Divine Wood tribe was destroyed and the painful scene of the people who died tragically in the black fire appeared in her mind. She suddenly realized that this person was still the most terrible demon. It turned out that these days, his kindness only made her let down her guard a little. Deep in her heart, she was still so afraid. The barbarian girl's body trembled as she stared at Lu Chen's palm. She felt that the terrible black fire would rise from it in the next moment and then engulf her. Perhaps before that, the almost boundless fear was about to engulf her. Lu Chen left the priest's stone house. Of course he did not do anything to Yi before this. The barbarian girl looked obviously frightened, and Lu Chen could roughly understand the reason. Lu Chen felt a little helpless about the terrible image he left on the barbarians. However, this kind of thing could not be changed and he had no intention of changing anything. However, before he left, he made it very clear to Yi that he did not care about this kind of thing. After listening to this, the barbarian girl seemed to be somewhat in disbelief, but she finally recovered from the state of being scared to death. Otherwise, Lu Chen really suspected that she would have been scared to death. But speaking of this, Lu Chen suddenly felt a little strange in his heart. He thought, aren't the barbarians known for their bravery and fierceness? Even if she is not a man, the barbarian girl should not be so fragile, nor should she have such a sensitive temperament. Or is it because I have too little contact with barbarian girls and don't understand them at all? Thinking about it, ever since he came to the southern wilderness, it seemed that only one barbarian girl, Yi, had close contact with him. Lu Chen shook his head and threw these thoughts out of his head. At the same time, he sneered in his heart. Hou Yan's so-called great cause of 1,000 years seemed more and more unrealistic. There were countless tribes in the southern wilderness. If each tribe had their own beliefs, then it would be impossible to truly unify all the tribes. Force could exterminate a tribe and force them to give up their ancestors and beliefs on the surface, but who could control the activities in the depths of their hearts? Moreover, even if they were strong for a moment and subdued everyone, but after a long time, there would definitely be changes. But at that time he would not be able to control it. In the center of the Black Fire tribe's camp, a large group of people stayed there waiting calmly. When the cold wind blew, the entire tribe was solemn and silent, emitting a strong murderous aura. Today was the day of the expedition. The war for the final ruling power of the northern wilderness was about to begin. According to the tribe chief Hou Yan's request, in order to restore the glory of the tribe's ancestors and seek their blessings, the Black Fire tribe held a sacrificial ceremony that had been interrupted for hundreds of years. And the person presiding over this sacred ceremony was, of course, the tribal priest Lu Chen, who had suddenly appeared. Looking at the black-robed priest approaching from afar, the people of the Black Fire tribe had a complicated look in their eyes. Perhaps this was an absurd scene that had never been seen for thousands of years. A human was about to preside over the most sacred and important sacrificial ceremony of the barbarian tribe. There was nothing more strange in the world than this. Perhaps this was the reason why the gods in heaven were so high and unfathomable. A stone platform was set up in the center of the camp. Lu Chen walked up the steps. Under the gaze of everyone, he worshipped the heavens and the earth and prayed to the gods. Then he suddenly raised his hands, and as his black robe fluttered, a dark flame suddenly rose. Immediately, all the Black Fire tribe people put aside their complicated thoughts. No doubt could resist the power of the dark flame. Under the illumination of the black flame, all the barbarians knelt down. Lu Chen waved the black flame expressionlessly and looked up at the sky. He did not have much reverence for the so-called gods. However, at this moment he suddenly felt a sense of danger. His eyes focused and he looked at the black flame. He saw that the black flame suddenly shook violently. After a moment, it suddenly moved in a direction like a hand beckoning the soul, or guiding the direction. After a while, the black flame seemed to slowly return to normal. A complicated and slightly shocked look flashed across Lu Chen's face. When he looked up, he saw a secluded and dark stone house in the distance, quietly standing in the corner of the tribe. Chapter 346. Yi was suddenly informed that the black-robed priest was looking for her just before the army of the Black Fire tribe was about to set off. When she jogged to Lu Chen's side, she heard Lu Chen telling her expressionlessly that she should prepare to leave with him. This request, or rather an order, attracted the attention of many barbarian warriors, and many gazes fell on Ye's shocked face. In the barbarian tribes, at least in the northern border region, fighting had always been the business of men. Warriors wielded weapons and fought on the battlefield for the sake of the tribe and glory. They would never allow women to follow them to the battlefield. Although this order was obviously against the unwritten rules of the barbarian tribes, no one stood up and said anything. It seemed that between the reverence of the black-robed priest and the abnormality of a little maid, most people valued the former more. Therefore Yi was muddle-headed and involuntarily followed the army and left the Blackfire tribe. Although in the beginning, Lucian was very calm and seemed to have told Yi to prepare before leaving, in fact, it was a completely different matter. The entire army of the Blackfire tribe was ready to set off. Even the most important ritual had been held. Of course, with so many people, they wouldn't wait for an inconspicuous little maidservant. After the black-robed shaman finished speaking to her, he immediately left. Therefore, the little barbarian maid, who was at a loss and in a panic, had no time to pack up. In the end, she just grabbed a few pieces of clothing and ran over. Then she followed beside Lu Chen with an aggrieved and nervous expression as they walked towards the unknown battlefield. There were very few barbarian women who had gone to the battlefield. Therefore Yi felt very unfamiliar and a little afraid of being in the army. After all, she was surrounded by burly men who looked murderous. Moreover, most of these people were not her tribesmen who had grown up with her. Instead, they were the murderers who had slaughtered her tribe not long ago. Yi felt very nervous, even breathing was a little difficult. She felt very ashamed and wrong because of this feeling. Even if she was a woman, especially as a daughter of the barbarian tribe, fear was still looked down upon by others, including herself. However, with so many complex emotions intertwined, in the end, the feeling of fear and uneasiness prevailed. So even though Yezi still had some resentment towards Lu Chen, she still subconsciously approached him. Lu Chen did not have any extra reaction to this. At most, he only glanced at her indifferently, and then allowed the barbarian girl to follow beside him. After walking for a while, Lu Chen suddenly asked Leaf, "Did you stay in the stone house alone in the Blackfire camp?" Yi was stunned for a moment, then nodded and said, "Yes, what's wrong?" Lu Chen was silent for a moment and then said, "I'm fine." Since he said that he was fine, Yi dared not ask any more questions. After that, Lu Chen did not say anything to her. After walking and stopping along the way, Yi followed the elite warriors of the Blackfire tribe to a campsite. Not long after, the sky turned dark. Before the sky turned dark, the leaders of the Blackfire tribe, led by Huoyan, had already ordered the warriors to settle down. Therefore, after darkness fell, the campsite quickly quieted down. Everything seemed very orderly and austere. This atmosphere surprised Leaf a little. When she lived in her own tribe, which was the Divine Wood tribe in the past, although she did not follow them out like this, she more or less learned about the situation of the warriors from the people around her. The barbarians were originally fierce and bold. As warriors who were about to fight to the death and did not even know if there would be a tomorrow or if they would return from the battlefield, they were even more unrestrained. Loud noises, shouting and drinking were common. Even fighting was not uncommon. In fact, this was the norm in many small tribes. But this night, for the first time, she saw the discipline of the Blackfire tribe suddenly become so strict. For a moment she was a little frightened. Although Yi didn't know much about these battles, he could clearly feel that the murderous intent of these cold and quiet people seemed to be far sharper than that of the clansmen's warriors that he had heard and seen before. She still stayed by Lu Chen's side because on this land and in this troop, apart from this black-robed priest, she did not know who else she could rely on. With her was the huge black wolf Atsu. This time Lu Chen also brought it out. But on this night Atsu still looked a little lazy. It lay down by Lu Chen's side early and closed its eyes to sleep. In truth, Yi really wanted to ask Lu Chen what was the point of asking him to come along for this kind of battle. However, she was still too afraid of the black-robed priest. In the end, she hid this question in her heart and walked around him with her head lowered, trying to see if there was anything she could do. There were no barbarian warriors in the vicinity. Most people subconsciously stayed away from the black-robed priest, even if they had the enchantment runes carved by the black-robed priest himself. It was in this silence that Lu Chen suddenly said to Leaf, "Sit down. We're here to fight, not to enjoy life. There's no need to be so busy." Leaf was speechless after hearing this. After a long while, she returned to Lu Chen's side and knelt down. She then plucked up her courage and asked, "Sir, if that's the case, why did you bring me here? If I don't clean up, I won't be of much use here." "It should be of some use." Lu Chen looked at her calmly and said, I heard that when you barbarians are extremely hungry, you can eat people. Leaf's face turned pale. Her body trembled and she quickly said, No, there's no such thing. Sir, where did you hear this rumor? I've seen it. Lu Chen's eyes flashed slightly. It was as if he remembered what he had seen and heard in the dangerous land of chaos a long time ago. You've seen it? Leaf was stunned for a moment. Her face was full of doubt. It seemed that she really didn't believe it. Lu Chen smiled and didn't want to argue with her. He just lightly said, Rest early? Otherwise we might have to wake up early tomorrow. Oh, Leaf agreed. She lay down not too far away from Lu Chen. At the same time she secretly criticized in her heart, if the army hasn't reached their destination, of course they have to wake up early. You don't have to tell me that. But on this night or perhaps the next day, just as Lu Chen had said, they woke up early, much earlier than usual. When darkness shrouded the earth, a large number of black shadows suddenly rushed out of the night. Then like wild beasts they fiercely pounced on the Blackfire's camp. The darkness seemed to solidify at that moment. In the camp, Lu Chen opened his eyes. His eyes were clear and full of spirit. It seemed that he hadn't slept at all. Beside him, Leaf suddenly woke up and jumped up. She said in surprise, What's wrong? What's wrong? But when she turned back to look at Lu Chen with a dependent and questioning gaze, she suddenly trembled and stood rooted to the ground. The black-robed priest was still sitting on the ground, but one of his hands was placed a foot in front of his chest. His palm was facing up. A black flame appeared in his palm and burned silently. Leaf held her breath and looked at the flame. Her body began to tremble. At the same time, the flame suddenly floated outward with a whoosh, like a person's finger, pointing in a certain direction. Lu Chen raised his cold eyes and stared at the nervous Leaf. After a moment he suddenly asked, Is there anything strange in your lower abdomen? Chapter 347. The night was dark, and the darkness seemed to be boundless, casting the land under the night sky into darkness. The Blackfire campsite was also pitch black, and there was almost no light. The cold wind blew through the air and Yi felt a little cold. For some reason, when the night wind blew past her, apart from the cold feeling on her skin, there was even a hint of pain as if she was being pricked by needles. She felt very nervous and she felt a little breathless. She also felt that the dark sky looked like it would collapse at any moment, crushing everyone here to death. What made her even more terrified was the black flame in Lu Chen's hand. The burning flame was reflected in her eyes, and her body began to tremble. She covered her lower abdomen with both hands, and then a painful expression appeared on her face. After a suppressed moan, Yi suddenly knelt on the ground, and then began to twitch like a dying beast. Soon, a black flame slowly lit up in the depths of her pupils. Lu Chen seemed unmoved as he watched the young barbarian girl's pained expression. From the beginning to the end, he did not have any intention of helping her. He just watched her coldly. After a while he withdrew his gaze and looked up at the sky. He stared at the dark and boundless sky. It was the high and mighty night. Then he smiled coldly and his eyes were filled with mockery and contempt. The darkness rolled like a surging tide. The night wind suddenly became urgent, and the whistling sound suddenly became mournful. Then there was a sudden flash of ice-cold blade light in the night. In the depths of the Blackfire tribe's camp, Leaf shivered. The inexplicable and indescribable pressure on her suddenly disappeared. She sat up and looked back into the distance. She saw countless figures moving in that direction. Roars and roars rose and fell one after another. Impressively, it was an incomparably fierce battle. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in front of her. It was Lu Chen walking over. At the same time, the fire god's staff had appeared in his hand, and was gradually emitting a bright light. Lu Chen no longer looked at her and instead stared into the darkness in the distance. After a moment he raised the fire god's staff and stabbed it into the dark sky. At the same time he chanted a mysterious and ancient curse, and a dark aura gushed out from his body. With a boom, large patches of black flames suddenly rose from his body, and danced wildly in the night. The fire god's staff instantly shone brightly, radiating a brilliant light in the night. It was like a sun that suddenly appeared in the darkness, and no one could look directly at it. Then countless dark auras shot up from the magic staff, and then flew into the dark battlefield, looking for the cursed black lines. A moment later angry roars and roars could be heard, like the wild roars of wild beasts. In the darkness, cries of alarm and screams could be heard. Many black figures suddenly grew in size. Even though they were so far away, they could still faintly hear the terrifying sounds of bones cracking. Yezi had a rough idea of what was happening in the darkness over there. Her eyes were filled with fear. When she looked back and saw the black-robed priest controlling the fire god's staff, looking at his demon-like appearance, she only felt that her legs and feet were sore, and her heart seemed to be unable to resist all this horror. In the distance, the wild roars grew louder and louder. The bloody smell of slaughter was also drifting with the wind, and it became thicker and thicker. The night became more and more desolate and dark. This was the first time that Yi, as a woman, was so close to a cruel battlefield of life and death. From the darkness, she could clearly feel the horror of the chaotic battle. All kinds of sounds came to her, and countless images formed in her mind. The sounds of breaking, howling, screaming, breaking bones and bleeding, falling to the ground, and all kinds of sounds that contained pain and brutality, filled with the smell of slaughter, all came to her ears, one after another. He trembled all over. At that moment she suddenly felt that she really did not look like a barbarian. But women never had to go to the battlefield. At this time, the black figure standing in front of her seemed to have given her a lot of courage, helping her to block out a lot of darkness. Because from the beginning to the end, Lu Qin had no intention of joining the battle, and even Yi took advantage of it. She secretly stayed in the same place and did not move. Then, in the darkness of the night, she heard the clamorous and terrifying voices grow louder and louder. After a long while, they suddenly reached a climax. It was someone howling in pain in the night, with furious roars and roars, as if they were questioning something or cursing at the top of their lungs. Then darkness fell, and an incomparably thick stench of blood covered everything. Until all the sounds began to slowly fade. Until dawn. Yi did not sleep for the whole night, nor did she dare to sleep. She was extremely nervous, and at the same time she had a deep fear. The pain of the extermination of her tribe was still haunting her for so long, and she could not forget it. When dawn came, everything finally settled. When the morning light shone from the horizon, a new day had begun in the human world, and a new chapter had opened in the wilderness. This land, with the dripping blood and horrible corpses, used the cruelest method of sacrificing life to announce the arrival of this day. When Huoyan, who was bathed in blood, came to the side of Lu Qin, his face had a trace of exhaustion, but his eyes were very calm. He nodded to Lu Qin. Lu Qin smiled. Just when he was about to speak, he suddenly heard a noise in front of him. Huoyan also noticed it and turned his head to look. He saw a figure suddenly coming from the crowd. He looked like an ordinary barbarian, but the most obvious difference was that he was wearing a fox's fur on his head. That was the chief of the Ghost Fox tribe. In addition, the chief of the Ghost Fox tribe was holding a head in his right hand. It was dripping with blood as if it had just been chopped off not long ago. Even though the head was already dead, there was still a look of anger on his blood-stained face. Huoyan and Lu Chen's eyes fell on the head of the dead man at the same time. That face seemed familiar. They had seen it before, and it was also a chief of a large tribe. Huoyan let out a long sigh and Lu Chen smiled. The two looked at each other, and after a while Huoyan suddenly said, "Thank you." Lu Chen nodded and did not say anything. At this time, the chief of the Ghost Fox tribe had already walked in front of them, and then casually threw the head in front of them. He grinned and said, "The head of the Thunder Lizard tribe is yours." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Well done. You can rest assured about what we promised you." The chief of the Ghost Fox tribe smiled and then turned to leave. Looking at the direction in which he strode, Huoyan's expression was complicated. After a while he said in a low voice, "In the past, in the southern wilderness, no matter whether the tribe was strong or weak, when there was a fierce battle, we would fight openly to the end. Even if we died, it was only for the honor of our ancestors. We have never used this kind of method." Lu Chen turned around and took the opportunity to pat his shoulder. Then he smiled and said, "It's okay. You will soon get used to this feeling and like it." After saying this he walked away. Huoyan stared at the back of the black-robed priest and did not say a word. Chapter 348. In the barren northern part of the southern wilderness, the 5 tribes had maintained a delicate balance for at least 100 years. But in this year, everything suddenly changed. First, the mountain spirit tribe gained the favor of a new high priest from the south, and the tribe's strength rose sharply. Then the 4 northern tribes besieged them. After a fierce battle, the mountain spirit tribe, who had the upper hand in the battle, was suddenly killed by an external force. As a result, the tables turned and the mountain spirit tribe was defeated by the 4 tribes. However, the situation did not calm down. Soon, the Black Fire tribe, one of the 4 tribes, suddenly gained a mysterious human high priest. This was something that had never happened in the countless tribes of the southern wilderness for thousands of years. However, all the rumors, slander, sneers, and swords were nothing in the face of weapons and blood. The black-robed priest had obviously gained the power of the god of fire worshipped by the Black Fire tribe. Using this powerful and strange witchcraft, the power of the entire Black Fire tribe suddenly increased by leaps and bounds. What happened next shocked the other tribes of the wilderness even more. After the Black Fire tribe experienced a fierce internal strife, the new chief, Huyen, became a bloodthirsty and crazy beast. He began to devour all the living things around him. They destroyed the Divine Wood tribe and the Mountain Spirit tribe. Then they started a war against the Ghost Fox tribe and the Thunder Lizard tribe. When the dark flames covered the sky, when the demonic Black Flame warriors were rampaging and slaughtering lives, the Ghost Fox tribe, who were fighting fiercely on the battlefield, suddenly turned around and gave the Thunder Lizard tribe, who were soaked in blood, a heavy blow from behind. For many years, the Thunder Lizard tribe had always been one of the most populous and powerful tribes in the northern part of the wilderness. They were also the tribe that opposed the rise of the Black Fire tribe the most. But on this day their fate fell into the abyss and they sank into oblivion forever. The army of the Thunder Lizard tribe quickly collapsed in panic, anger, and fear. What awaited them was an overwhelming, crushing defeat. Then, the Black Fire tribe and the Ghost Fox tribe merged into one and attacked the base camp of the Thunder Lizard tribe. Finally, this large tribe with a long history was destroyed and many treasures and people were captured. The smoke had yet to disperse. The once prosperous campsite of the Thunder Lizard tribe was now a complete mess. The fierce barbarian warriors of the Black Fire tribe and the Ghost Fox tribe were everywhere. They were laughing wildly, shouting and looting everything they could see. They looked like a group of wild beasts who had fallen into a state of madness. However, among this group of victors, there were some who were clear-headed, such as Huyen and Luchen. They ordered all the captured barbarians of the Thunder Lizard tribe to gather and guard them, so that they would not be harmed by the frenzied barbarian soldiers. However, even so, many members of the Thunder Lizard clan had died tragically in the campsite. The strong smell of blood drifted with the wind, and the battlefield that had just gone through a catastrophe looked like hell on earth. Yi, who had been walking all the way, was trembling non-stop. She followed closely beside the black-robed priest, not daring to stray even half a step away. Without a doubt, this scene reminded her of the massacre of the Sacred Wood tribe a few days ago. She felt that she would be tortured by this bloody scene for the rest of her life. That kind of fear made her feel a little hopeless and a little painful and ashamed. Lu Qin, who was walking in front of her, suddenly stopped. Atsu, who was walking beside him, also stopped. Only Yi, who kept stealing glances at the restless Yi, almost bumped into them. She was so shocked that she almost cried out for mercy. Just then a group of beastmen ran past them, laughing maniacally. They smashed and looted without a care in the world. One or two of the barbarian warriors even saw Ye's figure, and their eyes suddenly lit up, and they rushed towards Ye's direction. Luchen looked at them indifferently. One of the barbarian soldiers suddenly cried out. His voice was filled with fear and respect. Then someone rushed over and kicked the two idiots. Then he dragged the two dizzy fellows and retreated while smiling at the black-robed priest in front of him. He nodded and bowed to the black-robed priest and retreated for a distance. Then he turned around and ran away. He looked at the backs of the barbarian soldiers with a pale face. Her chest heaved and the corners of her eyes twitched. Although nothing really happened just now, the madness in the eyes of the barbarian soldiers, as well as the even more terrible scenes around her, told you what kind of fate would have awaited her if the black figure in front of her had not stopped her. She grasped the corner of her clothes, and then quietly moved closer to Lu Chen. Are you afraid? Lu Chen continued to walk forward without turning back to look at her. However, he seemed to casually ask this question. The corners of Ye's eyes twitched a few times. She looked at the bloody scenes around her and the messy camp and answered in a low voice, yes. But at this moment, Lu Chen did not speak anymore, and his expression did not change much. He continued to walk forward indifferently. He followed behind him. She did not know why, but she suddenly felt angry. A wave of resentment and anger surged in her heart, and she could not help but say, Your Excellency, these people died because of you, didn't they? And those who died in the Divine Wood tribe and the Mountain Spirit tribe. Countless souls wander in pain in the wilderness because of you. Don't you feel a little guilty? Lu Chen paused for a moment. After a while he turned around and looked at Yi. After Yi said those words she was subconsciously shocked. When Lu Chen stopped and looked at her she was even more shocked. The sense of awe suddenly surged and she was so scared that she took a few steps back. She murmured, "Sorry, Your Excellency, how dare you speak to me like this?" Lu Chen looked at her calmly and said slowly. Yi's face was pale. She kept shaking her head and waving her hands. She tried to explain to the black-robed priest, but for a moment she did not know what to say. In her heart she was extremely regretful at this moment. She even scolded herself 1,000 times. Was she out of her mind just now? However, Lu Chen seemed to have no intention of punishing her. After staring at the barbarian girl for a moment, he suddenly looked a little sad and said, "Everyone is the same." He was at a loss. After a while, she heard Lu Chen suddenly ask her, "Don't you feel strange?" Yi's eyes widened in confusion. She did not know what the black-robed priest was talking about. Lu Chen turned to look at his surroundings and said word by word, "When you see those ferocious-looking barbarian soldiers, you tremble in fear. You don't even dare to breathe loudly. But when these barbarians see me they are even more afraid. I'm sure you know what I'm capable of and what I'm capable of." He turned around and looked at Yi. A trace of ridicule flashed in his eyes, and the corners of his mouth rose slightly. "But you dare to be so rude to me and even question me in front of my face. This courage is much stronger than those barbarian soldiers, but you do not dare to speak in front of them. Tell me, why is that?" Yi was tongue-tied and did not know what to do. Lu Chen continued to say, "That is because, in your heart, even if you do not admit it, you have already determined that I am good to you. It seems that I will not do anything to you, right?" Yi's face was pale as she shook her head desperately. Her body trembled and suddenly knelt down in front of the black-robed priest. Then she kept kowtowing and said, "I was wrong, my lord, I was wrong. Please don't kill me. The human heart is the same. We will be in awe of strangers but always like to be rude to those who are close to us." Lu Chen's expression did not seem to change. He just looked at Yi condescendingly, and then his black robe swayed, turned around and walked away. Blood and fire flowed and burned around him, and the darkness followed him like a shadow. Yi knelt on the ground and after a long time she raised her head and looked at the back of the dark figure going away. For a moment she was at a loss. Then, as if she had suddenly lost all her balance, she suddenly sat down on her own feet. Chapter 349. Huoyan stood in the middle of the Thunder Lizard tribe's camp and looked around. He was full of satisfaction and couldn't help but feel the urge to roar to the sky. However, he managed to control himself. There was still a long way to go in the future. Restoring the glory of the Black Fire tribe's ancestors was only a small step. Huoyan felt a little heavy when he thought of this. Especially when he looked to the south, he thought that there might be more powerful tribes in that direction, and even more terrifying priests, shamans and venerables blocking the way. When he thought of these things he couldn't help but feel a little depressed. However, the goal in his heart was still unwavering. Just at this moment he saw a black figure walking over from afar. His eyes immediately lit up, and he revealed a smile as he went to greet the figure. "How was it?" Lu Chen asked him. "A great victory," Huoyan replied. The two of them only said these two simple words. Then they looked at each other and smiled at each other. Along with their smiles, the barrier between them that had been faintly discernible before seemed to have faded a little. The two of them stood side by side, looking at the black smoke drifting around them and the messy battlefield. Huoyan suddenly said, "Lu Chen, how far away is your witchcraft from becoming a true shaman?" Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and thought for a moment. He said, "It should still be a distance away, but these days my witchcraft spiritual power has been improving, it's..." His eyes flashed and he seemed to change his words. "Maybe it's because of the Fire God's staff." Huoyan obviously had great confidence in the Fire God's staff that was passed down from his ancestors, so he didn't notice the subtle change in Lu Chen's expression. He just nodded and said, "That's good. After all, shamans and venerables are the strongest people in the world. It's rare to see one in the vast wilderness. It's not that easy." He turned to look at Lu Chen and said with a smile, "But since you have the Fire God's favor, maybe you really have a chance to achieve this goal." Lu Chen smiled and said, "I hope so." Huoyan looked to the front. From where he was, he could see the captives of the Thunder Lizard tribe being chased to a corner. There were many of them and the sound of crying could be heard. They were surrounded by the Black Fire warriors, guarding and protecting them. Otherwise, the beastly soldiers in other places would be crazily plundering at this moment. Perhaps they would kill their way over, and at that time blood would flow like a river. As for why they wanted to keep so many captives, it was needless to say. Hou Yin turned to look at Lu Qin and pointed in the direction he was pointing. The population of the Thunder Lizard tribe is much more than I expected. The number of people we caught this time is at least twice as many as the previous 2 times combined. Lu Qin nodded and said, "This is a good thing." Hou Yin chuckled. However, at this time, Lu Qin suddenly opened his mouth and asked him a question that seemed to have no rhyme or reason. "We've captured so many people from other races. Have you thought about finding talents among them?" Hou Yin didn't react for a moment and said in surprise, "What talents?" After a pause he reacted, "Oh, you mean those black fire guards? We can continue to do that." Lu Qin stared at him for a moment and reminded him bluntly, "You told me a few days ago that you are planning to groom other new priests?" Hou Yan's body shook and his expression instantly became serious. He took 2 steps towards Lu Qin and asked in a low voice, "What, have you thought it through?" Lu Qin said lightly, "I have not decided what I want to do yet. But before that I want to ask you something." Hou Yan said, "Speak." Lu Qin looked at his eyes and said slowly, "You asked me to search for people with the potential to become priests, but there are so many captives. If I find such talents among them, what do you plan to do?" Hou Yan was startled, as if he had never thought that Lu Qin would ask such a question. He seemed to subconsciously want to say something, but then he tightly pursed his lips. After a long silence, his expression slowly became unsightly. He said, "This matter is of great importance. Let me think about it carefully before I give you an answer." Lu Qin nodded and said, "Okay." As he spoke, he turned around and saw that Yi was following Black Wolf Atu behind him. His face was filled with uneasiness and worry as he stood silently in the corner. 3 days later, the Black Fire Tribe's army returned to their camp after a great victory, along with a large number of Thunder Lizard tribesmen who had been captured. In this northern region of the wasteland, there was finally no longer any power that could stop the Black Fire Tribe. On this day the entire Black Fire Tribe was in an uproar. Everyone sang and danced, praising their ancestors and worshipping the gods. They praised the Firerock tribe leader who had made great contributions, saying that he was a decisive genius that had not been seen in the past 500 years and would not be seen in the next 500 years. Hou Yin was also very happy. He drank and celebrated with the people until it was dark. Only then did he return to his residence with the help of others. However, when he walked into his stone house, he saw 3 figures standing inside. They were White Eagle, Iron Bear and Black Bull, his 3 most trusted subordinates in the Black Fire Tribe. Hou Yin was startled and carefully looked at them. He saw that the 3 of them didn't have a smile on their faces, and their expressions were a bit serious and dignified. Hou Yin immediately sobered up a little. He straightened his body, calmed himself down, and waved his hand to let the people supporting him leave first. Then he walked to the seat in front of him and sat down. First, he took a big gulp of water from the cup next to him, and then suddenly splashed it on his face. His body shook a little, and then he wiped his face with his hand, looking much more sober. He looked at the 3 people and said, "What's wrong? Is there something wrong?" The 3 people looked at each other, and then White Eagle took a step forward with a worried expression. He said, "Chief, Iron Bear and Black Bull came to find me. They are worried about something." Hou Yin looked at his 2 powerful subordinates. Seeing their serious expressions, he asked in a low voice, "What is it?" Iron Bear clenched his teeth and said, "Chief, this time we defeated the Thunder Lizard tribe and took a lot of wealth and people. The result is much better than the previous battles." Hou Yin nodded and said in a puzzled tone, "Yes, this is a good thing." Iron Bear suddenly raised his head and said urgently, "But we have captured too many people. In these 3 days I saw Priest Lu Qin continuously force the Thunder Lizard captives to surrender, and then inscribe the Black Flame seal on them to turn them into Black Fire Guards." Hou Yin seemed to understand what he wanted to say, and his expression immediately became serious. He said, "How is it? How many people are there?" Iron Bear turned back to look at Black Bull. Black Bull hesitated for a moment and said, "Chief, I have been following the priest these days, helping him deal with these matters. I have secretly counted the number of Black Fire Guards. Now they have already surpassed the warriors of our Black Fire tribe." At the end of his words, a trace of deep fear and worry appeared on his rough face. At the same time he subconsciously looked at the door outside and then lowered his voice saying, "Chief, we really can't go on like this. There are too many Black Fire Guards, and they are all warriors who can transform into demons. The total number of warriors of our tribe is almost 20 less than the Black Fire Guards. If we were to count the warriors with the ability to transform into demons, the difference would be even greater. He clenched his teeth and seemed to hesitate a few times. Finally he said in a low voice, "Chief, if the priest has ulterior motives, we really won't be able to stop him." There was no longer any smile on Huoyan's face. He only looked deeply at the three of them. After a moment he slowly said, "Are you suspecting the priest?" White Eagle and the other two looked at each other, and after a moment the three of them lowered their heads at the same time. Finally it was White Eagle who opened his mouth and said sincerely, "Chief, we have to guard against this." Huoyan was silent for a long time. Just as White Eagle and the other two were feeling uncertain, they heard Huoyan slowly ask, "Then, do you have any ideas?" As soon as this was said, the three of them heaved a sigh of relief, and then a smile appeared on their faces. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.